going to call the Board of Selectmen meeting for February 5th, 2018 to order. As required by open meeting law, we are informing you that we will be video, audio taping, as well as live broadcasting this public meeting. In addition, anyone in the audience wishing to video or audio tape must notify the chairman now. Hearing no one, please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Anyone for weekly briefing?
Thank you. Carolyn Carey, Community Center Director. And on this day, 18 years ago today, the Community Center opened its doors, so happy birthday, everyone.
Happy birthday to you.
And I wanted to remind everyone of our events that we have coming up. The Ferry Door Scavenger Hunt throughout the town, some important things to see and find the ferry doors, and then we'll finish with a party with the Recreation Department on February 20th. You can pick up your packets for the ferry on February 8th. We have the Beantown Medium, which is will be on February 15th. Tickets are on sale now. If you're interested, get those. And we're doing the Indoor Farmers Market. We still do have a few spaces left for vendors. That is a free event inside the community center on the 22nd of February. The last thing I wanted to announce, nothing to do with the birthday, but we just received notice that the passport price for an acceptance agency is going up. So that's a fee that the federal government sets. We don't set it, so that will now be $35. It was $25, and that does come back to the town, but it goes up in April. So if you're thinking of getting your passport, you might want to call up and make an appointment before it goes up.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Carolyn. Anyone else for weekly briefing? Public comment and announcement?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Dan McLaughlin, 116 Uncle Vini's Road, South Harwich. I might be jumping the gun because I don't know if they're going to have public comment after the Saquatucket Harbor presentation, but I thought I would take the time to.
So with that, I will allow comment on the article, on the, on the grant. We're not going to talk about restaurants or snack bars. So if it's not pertaining, if it's pertaining to the grant itself, I'll allow it during that conversation. If it's not,
Okay, is there going to be a time when we can make comment on a restaurant or snack bar to let the taxpayers know what might be, how they might benefit from such?
I think if you want to speak about that, you're welcome to speak now on that.
Okay. Well, I've written to the town. I've been a lifelong summer resident in Harwich, and I lived here for a couple of years, year-round, at which time I served on the planning board, so I'm a little, familiar with politics of old, I guess. But as a taxpayer and as a restaurant owner, I wrote to request that I be involved in any RFP process that might come about. And as I've followed the process with interest, it seems that the town might be defaulting to the snack bar concept. So I just wanted to, before that happens, let the board and the decision makers and the taxpayers know that an RFP process could be very lucrative to the town. And I, for one, in my proposal, would build a restaurant at my expense, lease the land from the town, so provide annual lease payments. And as I project out the benefits to the town, and then, of course, the building would revert to the town at the end of the lease. So as I calculate out the benefits of rent, real estate taxes, meals tax, reversion, it's probably about a $4 million benefit to the town for zero investment. So I know that, and that could be up against a snack bar that may or may not make money for the town, may or may not be able to provide a living for someone who decides to lease out that restaurant or that snack bar. So I also, as I look at, I drive by Saquatucket Harbor all the time. You can't even see Saquatucket Harbor from the street. And I spoke with the site contractor who was down there the other day, and he explained that the elevations are going to actually change. The grade is going to go up towards the water, even making it more inaccessible from a view standpoint. So I do think that a restaurant would also provide a great place where people could enjoy the beauty of the harbor, would probably enhance the value of your transient slips as well as your permanent slips. I just think that before the town goes down the road of defaulting to building a snack bar at their own expense, leasing it out to somebody, that there's no harm in issuing an RFP. See how sweet the pot could be, and my proposal may get blown out of the water, which would be fine as a taxpayer, but I think people should know what is out there and what people are willing to do to enhance that project and provide long-term benefit to the town.
Great.
Okay?
And you did write that in a letter to the town administrator?
I didn't get into specifics. The letter I wrote to Mr. Clark just basically said, I've been in the restaurant business for a long time. I built these things from the ground up. I'd be an ideal candidate to do this. I could get this done. It would be a tremendous place, and that I would like to be involved in any RFP process. This is the most detail I've gone into is what I just told you about paying for everything and making lease payments going forward and such.
Great, thank you.
Okay? Thank you.
Anyone else for public comment and announcement? Chris?
You want to announce,
Yeah.
would you like me to announce, Mr. Chairman, on me? So just for the general public, we are in the process of building the annual town meeting warrant. Traditionally, the board has given a window for people to be able to submit for the annual town meeting. So this is the meeting in which that announcement is being made. I guess I would like to request that the board, that you close the warrant for noontime on this Friday for any potential articles that the general public would like to add in. I think for the annual, it's 10 signatures, so there would be 10 signatures that would be required to put something on the annual town meeting warrant. And as has been the fairly recent practice, certainly if people want to put something on, I would strongly recommend that they come in and have a quick conversation and see if we can make sure that it's going to be something that's going to be appropriate to put on the warrant and be able to actually be acted upon. And certainly, I'm not an attorney, but if we need to have it looked at by an attorney, we can do so.
Great, thank you, Chris. Okay, moving on to the consent agenda. We're going to take D up separately, Larry.
Before I do that, Mr. Chair, should I move that we, Chris's point, so we close on the warrant on?
You want a motion?
I think
on
that'd be
a
advisable.
motion, so we have a motion. So moved. We close the warrant on Friday at noon.
Second. Moved and seconded to close the warrant on Friday at noon. Any discussion?
Only Chris makes a good point. I know 3 years ago, maybe, we had several petition articles that were impossible at town meeting. They were so confusing. So I second his suggestion, come in for help if anyone has an idea.
Thank you, Larry. Any more discussion? All in favor? Aye. Consent
Mr.
agenda.
Chair, I move the following consent agenda items. A, approve the minutes January 22nd of 2018 regular session. B, approve the application for Dave Burtwell Remembering Walk to be held on May 12, 2018, and waive building department 10 fee of $55. C, confirm appointment of Mary Milowski as administrative assistant in the town clerk's office as recommended. And D, we decided to postpone for now.
Second. Moved and seconded to approve consent agenda items A through C. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're going to take up D, and Janelle is going to recuse herself from D.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I move we approve the Harwich participation in the fiscal year 18 Truro Regional CDBG grant for housing, rehabilitation, and childcare, and authorize the chair to sign.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve consent agenda item D. Any discussion?
Only this is a long-running funding that we use for helping those that need help, and also for a child care center on Bank Street. So it's, and I know we missed it 1 year, 4 or 5 years ago, Chris. That was a major handicap. We had to make it up because we had a group of children that depended on this grant. So I hope we get it.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Public hearings and presentations, Town of Harwich Federal Financial Income, Internal Controls and Procedures. Is that different from this? Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Carol Capola, Finance Director. I'm here tonight to discuss with you an internal control framework that is required by the federal government. So I'm not making it up. It's not some procedures that I want in place, although I do want them in place. When the town receives awards of federal grants, the town is required to comply with the internal control procedures that they have in place, the federal government has in place. So this is just a quick overview. I'm not going to go through all the, thousands of pages of documents that I've reviewed and read. Takes a number of years to review them, to understand them. They're certainly all available on the website, and if anybody would like to see them, I would be happy to provide you the appropriate links. So what we're required to do is comply with what they call the Green Book. And the Green Book comes from the Government Accountability Office. And that office oversees all of the federal government accounting systems. So you say, well, what do we have to do with the federal government? And as I mentioned before, when we receive federal grants, we must comply with their standards. So how are those standards tested? Those standards are tested during your external audit. And they're taken quite literally, and in addition, the auditors have, there are all these different colors, but they're the yellow book audit that they comply with, and they comply with all those standards for testing and evaluation and so forth. And so what are internal controls, and why do we care? Well, we do care. We care because we want the town to achieve its objectives. We want the federal government to achieve their objectives when they give us $1 million grant. And we want to be able to make sure that fraud and abuse are non-existent. I don't know if that's ever possible. I would hope it is. But that's really what this program is intended to do. It's intended to set out a framework and set out the procedures and to give you guidelines and a roadway so that you can comply. It's changed in September of 2014, I believe it was the 10th, and that these new standards were put in place. It's not that they didn't always have standards, they always had standards, but they never required them to be documented before, and this is what we're doing now. So you could comply early, you could comply in 2014, or a community could comply. The required date was fiscal year 16. We're a little bit behind the 8 ball, but that's okay because we're fixing it. So what does this do? What do internal controls do for the community? Well, they look at efficiency and the effectiveness of the programs that you have in place. It talks about operations. It talks about compliance with laws and regulations, whether they're federal or state laws. And then who uses the Green Book? Well, a program manager that's managing a grant would use the Green Book. The Green Book is this document right here. And so a program manager would use the Green Book. An external auditor would use the Green Book. And a financial manager would use the Green Book because they would want to verify compliance with the programs, the particular programs. Oh, okay. So who is COSO? So the Committee of Sponsoring Organization. It's a treadway committee. It was compiled of 5 different for-profit organizations, and many of those were accounting organizations, so us accounting folks thought that it should be necessary to document internal controls. We thought it was important for you to be able to test internal controls and evaluate them. We wanted financial statements to be in accordance with GAAP. We also wanted them to be in accordance with state laws and statutes. So what's it made up of? It's made up of 5 components. The control of environment, what are your risk assessments? What are your control activities? And we have information and communication, and how do you monitor those? And so those are listed here, and I don't want to read them all to you because you can see them all in there in front of you. And then we look at what are the principles that guide those, and what's part of each component. And I'm just going to give you a couple samples here. So the control environment is the Board of Selectmen. It's the top management of the community. And how do you govern day to day? What is your tone at the top? And that's what this strictly speaks to. What is the tone at the top of the overall governance of the community? And then there's other principles. There's 17 principles in all. I just gave you an example of 3 of them here. And how does management recruit and develop employees? And how do they evaluate their performance? And all of these items are part of that document that the town will and has adhered to, or will adhere to, and has developed. I'll say it that way. And then how do you evaluate them? So does the town have a formal code of conduct? Well, yes, it does, because it adheres to the statute of Massachusetts. And every employee is required to sign that they acknowledge that code of conduct on an annual basis. And so on and so forth. How does management evaluate whether the controls are in place, whether they're working, whether we have to revise them? And that's pretty much the key here. And then finally, what are our next steps? Well, it's to take these documents that we put together, it's to roll them out to employees, it's to train and retrain, it's to evaluate their effectiveness, it's to conduct a risk assessment, and then it's to start again. So that's all I wanted to provide for you this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Carol. Start with questions from Larry.
Thank you very much. You certainly gave us extensive documentation behind this, which I was impressed with the reminder in the documentation of the responsibility that we have as a select board in terms of reviewing and for the government grants. But it seems to me that, and I'm sure you're working on this, how do we extend this to our financial activities, that we have a better, we're following through our obligation to have, listen to your reports on financial activity, and we carry that through. So I was looking at as much as how we would extend it from just the federal emphasis on here to that, to organizational structure, so we have a good understanding of who's signing the invoices and tracking those. Because I think in the past we've possibly let some of those slip by us. And so I look forward to all those activities as you expend it going forward. So I appreciate your hard work on this.
Julie?
Yeah, thank you for the information. I was reading through it. I can't say that I was loving every minute of it, but it is good information. And some of the pieces of it, and goes throughout the document about the monitoring and such, but for instance, the various programs that we have federal monies, any kind of grant monies, I'm assuming that you're involved in some piece of that, but also when it talks about the different meetings and such, like for instance, under monitoring, management meets with program monitors, auditors, and reviewers to evaluate the condition of the programs and the controls. So is that something that we'll just need to make sure, like say for the harbor project, that there's weekly meetings with construction and finance and that kind of thing to oversee making sure the project is moving forward according to the statutes that it should?
Yes, that's correct. We will roll out this program, and that's when those activities will start occurring. And they may already be occurring. I can't speak to whether they are at this moment. It just needs to be documented if they are.
Thank you. That's it.
Janelle?
Carol, I just want to thank you for doing such a great job since you've come on board last year. I feel like you really have educated more above and beyond what you really need to, maybe. And I just appreciate everything that you do, and you make it very easy for me, who has no experience in any of this, to understand. So thank you.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I may be the only person here that's been subject to audits in federal government, so I can appreciate what you put together. Just to expand on what Carol said for the public's benefit, what she was talking about eliminating risk, the real point of this endeavor is creating enough processes so that you minimize risk, that one person can't carry through a transaction without other people knowing about it. So I appreciate the effort.
That's it. Thank you, Carol. Chris?
I just, I did have a chance to kind of go through the material and look at it pretty carefully. One of the things that I think it's important for, the community to know, I think that we do have a lot of the elements of this in place. There were certain things I think we actually do need to more formalize that we may do under state law. There are a couple spots where state law conflicts with federal law, so we have to figure out which is the higher standard and then make sure we adopt and use that. But I think the process of, getting this in a format that we can kind of explain to people, commence training and start that process, we will certainly do that.
Thank you, Chris. Do we need a motion on this, Chris, or is this, you all set?
No.
Just, we're going forward.
Information.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next up is the presentation on the Mass Seaport Economic Council grant. John?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, John Rendon, Harbor Master. As has previously been mentioned, I was recently notified by the Deputy Director of the Seaport Council that our project, Saquatucket Landside Renovation Project, has been selected for a Seaport Economic Council grant. I think we applied for a grant, not only that grant, but others to help fund the project that we have going on the land side. So February 13th, next week, I have to go in front of the council to brief the project in front of the Seaport Council, and then we'll likely get the formal approval for the grant. I think we've had, over the last 5 years, we've had 3 Seaport Economic Council grants to help support harbor projects, and we've had some good success in that. And so I've been to those other 2 briefings. It's a formal brief that will, and the purpose really of me being here today is to make sure that we're briefing the project that the board supports. So, with the additional grant funding, it's my hope that we can complete the project, one that was defined in the application that has been reviewed by the port professionals and has recommended to the Seaport Council that this receive that grant funding. That scope of the project is the exact same scope that was presented in front of town meeting this past May and overwhelmingly approved. And so there are certain aspects that we have reduced the scope because of funding. As you know, the Snack Shack was an ad alternate, and when the bids came in, we didn't pick that up because of the bids it would have put us over the $3 million that we had available. So I just want to real quickly, I'll go through these slides very quickly, but just to kind of highlight, the aspect of the project that now that we have the grant funding, that we could execute to complete the entire project that was approved at town meeting. And again, this just shows a front view of the Snack Shack that will be a takeout type window. People go pull up, get food, drinks, to go. No restrooms in that facility, seasonal only, and there's associated decking on the outside where tables will be out for people to sit and enjoy the view on the decking and the boardwalk that goes the length of the harbor. This just kind of shows, tough to read, I know, and I apologize, but this just shows the site view, the overview of the site. So, is there a pointer on this, Carol? There is. So, obviously, that's the Harbor Master building there with the snack shack. And then this is all decking in between both buildings. That's decking that supports the boardwalk that goes the entire length of the harbor, and it ramps down to support ADA, handicap accessibility. And of course, this is where the passenger boats are, and that's where our new handicap accessible ramp system will be for our marina, which is part of the waterside project. So currently, the snack shack is not included in the contract, and this decking in front has been eliminated as well because, you know, the building was eliminated. So those two areas, and then also this boardwalk here was reduced. This boardwalk goes essentially from the Downey property, the former Downey property, that is again part of the project. That's the garage workshop area. This is the additional parking spaces, 90 additional parking spaces. This is where the booths will be for the ticketing operation, and then so this piece here also was part of the value engineering to bring the project within budget. And then the other thing really is this just is an architectural view of the two buildings front and back of the Harbor Master building and the snack shack. And this is the inside of both buildings. Again, the snack shack is very basic. Again, it'll be designed to do hot or cold food and drinks. And then another part of it is the septic system. Again, I just show this to show that the engineering design on the septic system that would support the snack shack has been developed, has gone in front of the Board of Health. All aspects of what we're asking to include has been to all the regulatory boards, the Planning Board, Board of Health, Conservation, all the regulatory approvals have taken place, and it's because we intended to do them, and we were getting, you know, went in front of town meeting and it was approved, and we went through that process. And so that's really it. And I just wanted to quickly just to give a reminder, you've seen all those before. So, you know, as you know, we were aggressively looking for other sources of funding, and I've been consistent, I think, throughout my various presentations over the last 2 years, I guess we've been working at this, and certainly at town meeting, that we have submitted numerous grants. We actually applied for 5 grants for this project. We got $187,500 in a CZM grant to go towards the engineering and permitting and testing phase of the project. We put in a CZM grant for the construction piece that we didn't get approved. We put in an ADA grant to support the accessibility part of the project, and we did not receive that. I think most of you know we put a CPC grant in, and the initial vote was very positive to support, but once they learned that we were afforded a Seaport grant, that money was rediverted, and I was fine with that. And then now we've been selected for $1 million for the Seaport grant. So, you know, I think we've done due diligence to try to make sure that we found the sources of money to complete this entire project as was approved at town meeting. So I guess in closing, I just think we have a great opportunity here to get this thing done. And the purpose of being here is really, I want to make sure that when I go in front of the Seaport Council, that I'm representing the project that this board will support. And so obviously my recommendation is that I brief the project that the Seaport professional group have already reviewed and have identified as the type of project that meets the grant criteria and that they can support. And that project is the same project that was approved at town meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for all the work that you've put into this.
Yes, sir, thank you.
Before I get on to the board, Chris, you want to add
Thank
to
you,
this?
Mr. Chairman, just for the opportunity. I think John did a great job of kind of stating what we're here for, really just to affirm that what he presents to the grant is what we submitted. So I think that that is important, that we have that affirmation. In terms of, there are some technical elements that the warrant article itself contemplated applying for grants and trying to obtain grants. So there is a question that I have in my mind, which we are sending materials to Attorney Giorgio to try to get some response from, and that is that the grant agency is going to issue the grant on, well, they'll do the award probably on February 13th, and then after that, we'll get a contract. That contract obviously be for $1 million, and that would come to the board for approval. And in that, the question is, can we spend money within the scope of the existing article that was approved at town meeting, let's just say at the end of February, and do the necessary change orders to effectuate that, to get the work done that we had fully laid out, that obviously we had to scale back with the existing funds that we had. The other potential avenue is that if it is not sufficiently within the scope, we may need to have an acceptance of the grant at town meeting and an acknowledgement of what that scope change would mean. That obviously, if we can go in February or March, then we can effectuate and get this thing done as presented to town meeting in a more timely manner. If we have to wait until May, then certainly we can line up and do what needs to be done to have all the change orders and such ready to go. And then we would have to wait for town meeting to take action on the acceptance of the grant. But I think for tonight's discussion, it's really just an affirmation of the scope and measure of what's been proposed. And then the subsequent discussion, once I get better information from the attorney, will be on, can we do an award at the end of February, beginning of March, or do we have to wait for town meeting action? So I just want to, and then just to the comments that were made, you know, I think it is important that the snack shack, and I think John and I really take instruction from the board and from town meeting and the action of the voters. And what was presented was a snack shack in the harbor master's office, as you see here, and that's what we've been going on. Whether a 60-seat or a 100-seat restaurant is a good idea or a bad idea, you know, that's something that I've already provided a memo to the board with some of the concerns, and there certainly are some concerns, fairly significant concerns, with having a restaurant. And really, I don't know if the board, it's certainly probably not on the agenda specifically for tonight, as the chair has already pointed out, but I think that at least an acknowledgement that what we're doing is just a follow-up to what we've already told town meeting and the residents what we're going to do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. John, you're before them on February 13th, and they'll render their decision fairly quickly, I would imagine. The money wouldn't be able to be spent until after July, correct?
No.
Right away.
Just to answer that, yeah, under the grant, as we've been provided, the grant contract, that's why the grant contract is relevant. We may be authorized as soon as they vote it. So we could, in essence, have the board vote, and we would have to then line up the necessary change orders where, I think John pointed out, that really the necessary change orders are the boardwalk work, the construction of the snack shack, and then the septic system are three that come to immediate mind. We did not go out to bid, and we were planning on doing the separate project for the paving on the Downey property, so that would be bid. So we do need to follow the grant contract materials, but that's kind of, we could go pretty soon if they say that, yes, according to them, we could spend that money after it's executed, which could be in February.
So I guess my question is on timing and why we're not considering going back before town meeting with separate articles, one to finish the project the things that we saved for value engineering, and then a separate article for a snack shack. You know, through this entire process, we've said to the voters and said to the taxpayers that we're going to apply for grants to offset this project cost. And the amount that they voted was $3 million. So on more than one occasion, Chris, I asked you, and John, I asked you in a public meeting, any grants that we get will offset this project. It will go to against the $3 million. And both times I was answered yes. Town meeting did vote $3 million. They voted the project at $3 million, not $3 million plus grants. And I'm just curious as to why we're not considering giving them the option on whether they want a $2 million borrow or they want the $3 million borrow and then to use the grant to go forward with the snack shack, which was always an ad alternate. And to your point, John, I guess going before the council, it was an ad alternate. And in reading through your material, I think that we've kind of hit the mark on almost everything in that application except for the snack shack. And I wonder why we couldn't, if they are against it, why we couldn't say it's going before our town meeting in May and they're going to make the decision.
I'll answer a few points there. You know, Mr. Chairman, I watched the tape on town meeting floor, as I'm sure you did. I said it was a estimated $3 million project, and I used the word estimate. And I also said that I was applying for grants to help fund the project. I didn't say offset. And the timing of this is such, right now we're putting the septic system on hold. And we've asked CC Construction to hold off because we have the possibility of getting this project done. And so it's not going to cost us more money later. So we have the option to implement the plan that I showed you that has already been designed to support the snack shack. So I just think if we delay it, we'll run into more costs and more delays.
Before I open it up to the board, I respect that and I appreciate it. I also, it wasn't town meeting floor that I asked you that question. It was during presentations to Mr. Hart and the Waterways Committee, to the town administrator, and to yourself. I think this board has said on several occasions that anything that we get will be an offset to the project. And I do believe, in my mind anyway, and the only thing that I'll support personally will be it going back before town meeting and them making the decision on whether this $1 million gets spent or not. I'll start with you, Don.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't on this side of the table at town meeting, but I have to say, you've heard me say this in other types of things about town meeting. We're at this juncture because we somehow have strayed from what had been the process. And the process was real simple. We identified something we wanted to do, we put it out for bid, and then we went to town meeting, and they knew what they were getting for what we were paying or for what we were receiving. Doesn't matter, one way or the other. And there was clarity. And somehow along the line, we got to the point where we started saying, trust us, and we'll keep you involved. So having said that, I went back too. I went and started looking at things. And it brings to mind the old saw about verbal contract isn't worth the paper it's printed on. The discussion centered around whether the money was going to be reinvested within the confines of the $3 million, but the motion at town meeting never said anything, which is what got voted on. So again, I got a problem with that because if you have a real project, like the fire department, it's going to go to town meeting, everybody's going to know what it looks like, everybody's going to know what it costs, and they're going to know how much they're in for and what it's going to look like for that money, and then they're going to go on. This thing was really at the 11th hour that it was fleshed out. Then it went to town meeting, and there was a significant amount of discussion about what it is we wanted, what it is we didn't want, whether the money was going to be part of the $3 million or not part of the $3 million. I do know that we ended up, and I'm probably the only person who stayed with this position, but what we voted was for snack shack within the confines of the larger project. I'm still okay with that. I haven't been a proponent of a restaurant. I haven't been a proponent of not having anything. But that is what the motion was. And whether or not the million was included in that, I don't know, because it also has to do with an external constraint. What does the grantor expect? Does it have to be for work that's an augmentation of what we've already approved, or is it roughly for this, and could it substitute for the money that we had? So even having the discussion about whether this deletes down some of the bonded obligation of the town because it's grant money, I don't know, because I don't know what the terms of the grant are, whether they'll allow it or not. So when we get into the discussion, that's going to be like a central point. But again, going on forward, I hope we never go to a town meeting again and say, hey, we got this cool idea, I'd like your approval of it, and we'll let you know how it works as we go along, because that's how we get to this place.
Janelle?
So I also recall the conversations here about the grant, if we were to receive it, or them, offsetting the $3 million. Although, as Don said, it was not technically said as part of the article, nor was it added as an amendment. So I guess, my feeling is what to do. The $3 million is the cap, and the discussions that I was part of last year said the grants would offset that. And I don't think we should have a snack shack. I think we should have a restaurant. So I still think we should have a restaurant. Yep. Makes sense to me. Mr. McLaughlin made a good point. I totally agree. The $4 million is a valid number. So I'm going to have to say that I would go to town meeting as well.
Julie?
So I have a couple different questions, in the sense that I remember conversations. I remember when we were at town meeting. I did not go back to look at the tape, so I trust what's being said. I also wish that we could go back, if I had the time and energy, to look at all the different projects over the course of time that have gone over budget from what they were voted at. I'd like to know that too, but obviously that could take a lot of time and a lot of poring through documents that I don't have personally. So first of all, I'd want to make sure that going to the council, we're not jeopardizing these monies. I mean, we've been lucky enough to be awarded $1 million. It's a substantial amount of money. We want to make sure that we don't endanger that in any way, shape, or form. So that's my first concern. Secondly, I think without specific language about the vote, and I don't want to mislead anyone, the vote is the vote is the vote. It was $3 million. I get it, and I respect it. My only thing is that when we voted the $3 million, we also knew that we might get a grant and we might not get a grant. So we were willing to spend $3 million for this project, knowing that we may not get the $1 million grant. So I think that has to be considered too. And the only worry I have I have no problem with going back to town meeting at all, except to say that if we're stymied, and I guess I need clarification. I mean, I appreciate the septic issue, because if that's where we need to start, and if that's gonna hold up the whole thing, it seems kind of crazy to me to be holding up all of that piece. But maybe this is more a question for Carol, but when we're going to start the process and spend the money, can we look at what we're spending initially as our own funding towards that septic, so that we can please everybody and go back to town meeting, so that we don't delay the project, right? But so we can move forward and do everything at once, rather than go back and cost us more money in the end, not delay the project further, and know that we're going to town meeting for the snack shack, which people supported. And I'm glad to hear, I think it's really important too. If we don't have the parking for a 60-seat or 100-seat, I appreciate that, I understand it. I think we should look at that again, because that was I know Charlene had to sort of work under the gun. So I think we should look at it, make sure that that's accurate, and if it's accurate, it is what it is. But the snack shack was voted by the taxpayers. I don't think there's a lot of projects in town that have gone to the dollar, never mind get a grant. So I think all those things need to be considered, but I would like to see us definitely move forward with that septic. I don't know why we wouldn't. And we can use our own monies to go forward and still go back to town meeting.
Larry?
Chris has a comment.
Well,
on
I
this.
just wanted to comment a little bit on, you know, it is interesting. This is not the first project that we've been tight on. So just as, for instance, Muddy Creek was a project that we did. We started off at the initial estimate, I think it was $2 million, then went to $5 million. And due to regulatory changes, we had to go back to town meeting and ask for a supplemental appropriation of $1 million, half from us and half from Chatham, to finalize that project. And we finally did get where we're slightly below that additional appropriation. I think that in this circumstance, the way I look at it is the economy has picked up and the bids came in higher than we had anticipated, than what was estimated. I don't disagree that we should try to go into town meeting with bids in hand. That would make life a whole lot easier. But that still is no guarantee that change orders won't emerge.
Right.
So I think it is important in terms of the language. Maybe people do know this, or maybe people don't know this, but I'm the guy that gets tagged with drafting all these all the motion language. And the guidance that I was provided is that if we know that we have a grant for X amount of dollars, then we can put it in there and plan accordingly. We did that on the water side. We knew we had that $1 million coming, and that was put into the motion, and we tried to create that cap of $7 million. As the board will recall on that, we wanted to do some additional dredging, so we did authorize additional work to be done with other revenues that we had from the dredge account and so on. So it's not unusual that we have a project that doesn't necessarily fit into a nice box, and the need to do some additional work is going to be needed. I think to the point, and this is where I think it's important for the attorney to weigh in, and we can look at the issue of can we do the septic now, and then wait for the change orders to do the balance on the other part of the project, so we can look at and see if there's enough money to do that. I think the idea is we want to get as much construction done to avoid any parking-related issues for this summer. We know we're not going to finish this summer. We know we're going to extend it to the fall at this point. So does that mean we do it in the form of change orders and acceptance of the grant now? Or do we do that through town meeting action? And we're not going to know that answer tonight until John Giorgio, the attorney, has a chance to really review the grant materials and look at it.
Chris, I certainly appreciate that, but John Giorgio is simply going to weigh in a legal opinion. What I'm saying is that we have a moral obligation to the taxpayers of this town, since we did say over and over in meetings that any grants that we got would offset the $3 million project. I understand what was said at town meeting, I understand how you crafted the article. But again, I don't understand why we're not looking at going back before the town and giving them an option. 2 members of this board still want to talk about a restaurant. A member from the public stood up and still wants to talk about a restaurant. There's 2 other groups that still want to talk about a restaurant. 3 weeks ago, we were running towards an RFP for a restaurant, and now we're looking to negate that and put in the snack shack because town meeting voted that. Town meeting voted $3 million. John, we had this conversation. You can shake your head in the audience as much as you want, but we had this
I don't
conversation.
know what you mean by running towards the restaurant. That didn't come from me.
We had 2 meetings on it.
Okay, but
I do think that's
just to
an
be
unfair
clear.
characterization. We were presented with options from the general public.
Chris, first of all, I'm running the meeting. I sat in a planning board meeting where the head of the Waterways Committee was sitting before the planning board trying to get pre-information on a restaurant. So saying we were running with a restaurant is an accurate statement. Without a Waterways vote, he was before the planning board trying to get support for a restaurant. And you have 2 members here that still want to explore it. And what we're being asked for tonight is we're being asked to have John Rendon go before the Economic Council and say that we're going to support the project that he applied for the grant. That's the question, and that's on the 13th. Does this board want to say tonight that John can go into that meeting and support the spending of $1 million grant? That's the question. It's not whether we do the septic system now, it's not any of that. Do we want to authorize the extra expense? You know, and as far as the things went over budget, things were over budget before we started. We value engineered down to try and get under the $3 million mark, not knowing we were going to get the grant. We're over budget before we went into this project. And the restaurant was voted at town meeting as an ad alternate. And we're not asking the taxpayers whether they want to spend $2 million on this project or take advantage of the $1 million, knowing that we're going to be building a fire department and putting $22.5 million worth of pipes in the street. That belongs at town meeting. So this board's question is simple. Do we want to authorize, or do you want to authorize John to go represent that we're going to spend 3.6, 3.7 million instead of the 3 million we told him we were going to? I'm going to open it up for a question.
Wait a minute.
Larry didn't get a chance.
Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, I'm not sure I want to, but I'm going to weigh in because it's, you know, we've all given it a lot of thought. If you look at the discussions, which I wasn't privy on all the discussions, if you go back and I think it's down implied or mentioned, I find it interesting that the motion for the waterway, the water side, was very clear that any grant money was to offset the town meeting appropriation. The motion for the land side was also not clear. It had no restrictions, and so you could apply as what you want. And I don't know. It appears so. That's that. So we have what was happening at town meeting. At least it's black and white. You know, a lot of discussions going on back and forth. You know, I initially was certainly against the restaurant and thought the snack bar was the way to go for various reasons. We've had some ideas on a restaurant that's presented here and before that I wanted to get more information on. What was the parking situation for that? And I keep hearing more questions. What's it have to do with the traffic patterns? What happens if the restaurant goes belly up? Do we end up owning a vacant building? How do we guarantee that we do get lease? I wanted to know, as we talked before, I want to know what the commercial value of that is so that we're clearly not seen as giving a private company a break. We don't have the answers to those yet, but if you go back and you look at the timing of doing the snack shack and the fact that the town did vote for that concept, I agree with you, Michael, that it's, you know, it was now additional money, but it's, we see that in some other projects. So I thought we were going to go, you know, initially we were going to talk more before this came up, more about the restaurant. I'd come to my personal stance was my position was going to be to wait for at least a year to see what happened with that. So we understand the traffic flows, we understand because there's no incentive to move on a timely fashion because we have to redo the septic anyway. That seems to be one of the factors we're looking at. Where I am now is I want to know, now timing does become a factor. If we get to $1 million and that forces us to move ahead in a timely fashion and get the snack shack, and that's at least the concept of town meeting like, I'd be for the snack shack at this point. Hope I haven't shown how I go back and forth. I'm not very consistent, I'll grant you that. But I'm trying to figure out what the information is and where we go with it, because it's been going back and forth, and I think we've all given, and I applaud the rest of you, and the difference of opinions we've had, because we have everyone's given a lot of thought. But at this point, I'd hate to miss an opportunity of a grant that puts us forward for the $3 million on this. It gives us it does give us a deck so people can sit out and enjoy the view, and it would help. I don't know if there's enough money in there to help on the pavement or not, John. Would that be part of this?
Yes.
Chris has answered it, John.
Yes.
The second question I have is, I assume that the $1 million C grant, we could not apply that to reduce the $3 million? Is that the way that works?
That was my question.
I want to understand that too. Does that prevent us from using that money toward the $3 million?
That's
Because then
what's
it really is an easy decision.
That's what's in the grant application.
Yeah.
It's $2 million to the town,
Plus
1
one,
million to
yeah.
the grant.
Well, then, that makes it even more interesting, because we could still get the grant and not go for the snack shack, is what you're saying.
Right.
So we should still go.
We should go, yeah.
Well, we should, of course, we should still go. That's what we tell them.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, you know, the grants that we have received previously, Seaport, they're reimbursement grants. So we submit invoices for the work that's been done, and then we get reimbursed through the grant. So the application asked for me to give a breakdown. And so it clearly said, you know, estimate or actual cost. So at the time, it was an estimate. There's a timeline, and it showed when they were actually going out for bid, which was after the application process. So, you know, at the time, the estimate was a $3 million project. So I put in there $2 million appropriation town, $1 million for the grant. But that doesn't mean that they're going to hold us to that. It was an estimate because we hadn't even gone out for bid yet.
Anyone in the public want to speak on this?
Interesting discussion. I'm glad I stayed for it because the answer just came from your own harbor master. Your grant application clearly stated, and he just stated, that this is a reimbursement type of grant. Town meeting authorized you to spend $3 million. If you got grants, then you appropriate those grants to the $3 million. You raise our taxes for the balance. They did not appropriate $4 million. There's absolutely no problem, and I'm sure the state would find that you were doing your job if you said to them, thank you very much, we are going to take your $1 million, we're going to go back to town meeting because there has been some overrides on these costs, and we're going to actually appropriate $4 million, $4.5 million, whatever you need to finish it, with, in hand, the grant. And you can tell the people at town meeting, yes, we're applying this $1 million towards it. So your taxes are only going to go up $300,000, whatever the number it is. We're playing with words here, you know. I go to town meeting. I listen to town meeting. I believe I understand what people are saying. Irregardless of what legal counsel might say, the vote says you can and cannot do. To me, that's worth about the paper that it's written on. Town meeting had hundreds of people there, and I believe if you polled them, they left that day knowing that they were appropriating $3 million, and if any grants came in, it was going to, and I'll use the harbor master's words, offset the cost. Not add to the cost, offset the cost. Now, to a simple farmer, that means if you're spending $3 million and you get $1 million grant, I only got to come up with $2 million. As he just described, is actually in the application from the state. How can you even tell the state, oh yeah, we'll take your $1 million, we're just going to spend it on top of the $3 million? That's a violation of the application itself. I mean, this is real simple. Accept the grant, make it condition that you're going to go back to town meeting and clarify what's going on, and build the project that town meeting voted for. Everybody knows I stood up at town meeting and asked you to separate these projects. Nobody went for it. So here we are today, but do the right thing now. That's a good project. As the harbor master said, majority of the people at town meeting supported it. But now we have some money that's going to really make it finished off completely, and we have to appropriate some more money. So please do the right thing. Accept the grant, but go back to town meeting.
I would respectfully disagree a little bit with you, Leo, that. Always do. But I try to do it respectfully. In that, that's the sense of the town meeting, but I still have to go back to what the motion said when it was read. And I compare that to the year before, where the motion was very clearly stated the other way. So I don't, you may or may not be right on the sense of the town meeting, but I think it's still black and white on what was there.
Don?
I'll respectfully disagree with you. Actually, I agree with Leo, but in a kind of ironic way, we're at that point right now. We have sequenced this so that we got the other elements of this project in under the $3 million. If we get this grant, and I totally agree, we should get it and devote it to the project, and go back to town meeting, and if they thought they were willing to appropriate by a tax levy $3 million to do the project, I don't think there'll be any problems. Because now we're at the point where we've isolated out, the last man in happens to be the snack shack. So you go back to town meeting, and if that's what everybody thought, they'll appropriate the extra $1 million back towards the project instead of towards taking down the total cost of the project from 3 to 2. And if they don't agree, we devote the $1 million to legitimate costs that were part of what the grant was for. That's what I was asking is, can we spend this on the scope of the project, absent the snack shack? So I think it's pretty simple. You do say you want the grant. And then you go back to town meeting and say, we didn't appropriate enough with whatever identified source to get the project done, but we did get $1 million. You'd still be within the $3 million out of your pocket, out of your debt exclusion pocket, to finish this thing. You still want to do it? The last town meeting said you did, but now we've got that one last element left. Do you want to take the extra money and build it?
Anyone else? Let me get some. There's a few other people in the public that want to speak. Anyone else want to speak?
Hello, my name is Bill Kane. I've lived in Harwich for 35 years. I'm here because I'm very excited about the changes coming to Saquotucket Harbor. One of the reasons I chose to live and raise my family in Harwich is because the town chooses to do things the right way. Over the years, I've been very happy to vote for the new high school, the community center, police and fire stations. We all vote for these things because it's part of what makes Harwich a nice place to live. I was so happy when we started talking about improving Saquotucket Harbor, and a lot of people in town believe this is long overdue. When you drive along Route 28, you see the flags calling us the town of 3 harbors, but the access to them is very limited, especially at Witchmere and Allen Harbor. Here at Saquotucket Harbor, we have this incredible piece of land which is very unique on Cape Cod. What a great opportunity we have to create a welcoming place that everyone, boaters and non-boaters, can enjoy, and that will draw people to the town. I was there at town meeting when we voted for this project and was so happy when that plan was approved. I'm here to ask the Selectmen to use this grant money that the Harbor Master has received for the project to give the voters what they voted for, the original plan. I would like to share one final thought. My parents live in Harwich also. They're 85 years old. Several times last summer they drove all the way to Hyannis to enjoy the waterfront. They get a cup of coffee or something light to eat, a donut or bagel. They walk around the harbor's edge to see just the activity and the people at the harbor. How nice it would be for the residents of Harwich of all ages to be able to come to Saquotucket Harbor and Harwichport and enjoy this very special place. And just an afterthought, I was at the town meeting, and in my mind, we voted $3 million for this. And if by the work of the harbor master, and if they were able to get the grant, I don't know all the technical end of it, but it seems to me that the town, we approved $3 million for the project. If by getting the grants, we can get this project and give it to the town, that's what I think we should do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for all your hard work.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening, members. My name is Barry Bissett, business owner, boat owner. I have a slip in the harbor. It's very nice, has been nice. This looks like a great project. My concern is parking, because I don't know if you folks use the harbor. It is busy in the summer. There's times when, even as a slip owner, and I have a front row parking spot, sometimes I'm parked halfway down to the Downey project. I think so. Part of it is the Freedom, the Yankee, the other head boats, the employees at Brax, everybody's using the harbor, not just the boat owners, And I believe there's a medical facility going in across the street, and they have limited parking. Now, they're going to be parking over there. So I know we have new parking spaces. There's some more, but, talking about this extra project, 60-seat restaurant and so on, is there really room for all the parking? So, just my concern.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Julie?
So, a couple things just related to, first of all, on the parking. I mean, I think we've acknowledged that, we understand if there are limits to the parking, and I think a snack shack brings not so much of a concern on the parking. I can also attest to wanting to take advantage of that, and I work all day, so I wouldn't be down there till the evening, and I think that's the case for a lot of people in town. So I don't necessarily know that the parking is a massive issue for the snack shack. However, the other piece I feel like we're kind of forgetting here, and really just thinking it through, we're going to have revenue. We're going to have money coming in from this snack shack. We're going to have lease. We're going to have possibly a piece of the profits if we structure the lease appropriately. So we're forgetting about another source of revenue that, again, offsets that $3 million voted at town meeting, not knowing whether or not we were going to get this $1 million grant, and another piece that's going to make us some money. So I'm just throwing that in there, that there's a piece we really haven't discussed, and it will cost whoever wins, in terms of the RFP, that's going to be a piece of the revenue that we can also use to offset the cost. And the other thing that I also want to talk about that we started, I think, when these conversations started, we also talked a lot about, and I remember the golf course was going through some things at the same time, and Angela was sitting here then, and we talked about the fact that these were projects that have fees that offset those things too. We talked at great length about that, about the fact that there were slip fees and different harbor fees and golf fees and all these other pieces of that pie that were helping to offset those costs. So I don't want us to forget about that as well. So.
Hello, my name's Kent Drusella, and I was a member of the former Saquatucket Redevelopment Committee. I spent 2 years working on that plan with John and other members. And I know at the town meeting, we voted to spend $3 million. Spend $3 million. And if the grant came in after the fact, the grant came in after the fact. My problem is the word discussions that went on after the town meeting. Those discussions mean nothing. They mean nothing. The town voted to spend $3 million, get the project done that way.
If you're referring to my comments,
I'm referring to anybody's comments.
those meetings that I spoke of were the presentations when you guys came before us.
All I know is that I was at meetings for 2 years, and there was nobody but the committee at those meetings.
But you all
Nobody. Nobody.
But you all presented to us, right? But you presented to us.
You voted for it.
You're missing.
And you voted to pass it.
Right. Unfortunately, you're wrong. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While Julie is absolutely right, the one quirk about municipal finance is I could have a neatly stacked bunch of $100 bills sitting right in front of me physically on a table in town hall, and until the state certifies it next year that it's there,
Yeah,
I don't get to spend it. So where we're at.
Timeline, we know that.
Yeah, I understand
No,
that.
I know you do. I'm not sure the public understands it. Eventually, that money will come as cash flow, and we'll be able to reduce things. What I'm hoping for, like I said before, is that we come out of this meeting with at least understanding that we, A, are going to accept the grant, and B, because you have to appropriate it. It's not visible to the public yet. You go back to town meeting and ask them, do you want the snack shack, and you want to
Just to
appropriate
be
it?
clear, nobody here is saying that we're not going to accept the grant.
I know, but we do have to go to town meeting because the $3 million is an appropriation that we don't get to make. Town meeting does.
Right.
We need to go back and say to them, we now have real money from this grant. Do you want to appropriate that in addition to the $3 million you already approved to build this or not?
Let me let that gentleman speak.
Yes, I just wanted to ask a question. If you sent out an RFP for a snack shack, a 60-seat restaurant, a 100-seat restaurant, whatever it may be, and asked the respondents what they would do for those various options, you'd know what you were dealing with. You'd have, I know you'd have a respondent who would spend the $1 million to build the building and their portion of the septic system, and maybe you could take that grant money to offset other aspects of the project. And would also answer your question as to what type of rent you would have coming in with a snack shack to defray the cost of constructing that yourself. So,
Thank you. So back to the question, because we're getting way off track. The question is, John's going to the grant meeting on February 13th, and he needs direction from this board on whether or not he can represent that we are going to continue the project as it was originally applied for. Correct, John? Yes, sir. Thank you. So the question in my mind is, and I think Don just went there, town meeting appropriated the $3 million. This is a reimbursement grant. Does this board think that it should go back before town meeting, or does this board want to tell John that we're going to make the decision, pending what legal says, that he can spend that $1 million?
I'm comfortable with going back to town meeting. My question I was going to get to was, I want to see what the warrant language is.
It's in here.
It's in the
Yeah,
packet.
oh, it's in here, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
Right,
I missed
right
that.
after John's
Sorry
letter.
about that. I
Yeah,
read
Article
most of it.
20 from last year?
Oh,
Julie?
no, I read it from last year, yeah. No, I got that.
Oh, what the,
What the new one would be.
what it
Oh,
would
oh.
be.
No,
yeah.
because that's why I was referring to the language, you know, the water side language versus this language. That I read.
John, Julie?
So my thing here is, I don't want to jeopardize this grant in any way, shape, or form, because in the next breath that we talk about going back to town meeting about spending an extra $400,000, I'm just going to use that figure roughly. I also don't want to lose $600,000 because we're saying, well, we have to go back and we have to do this because we feel that ultimately we said one thing, though the language shows a little different than what we're saying. I have no problem going back to town meeting for the official stamp, but I don't want to look at the taxpayers and say we lost $600,000.
Thank you.
That to me is more disturbing than anything else.
Janelle?
So am I correct that it was 2.8 million the last update that we got?
It's 2.88 minus, and plus the parking lot, plus the Downey parking lot. That
Which was
wasn't-
another 95.
95, plus the labor that wasn't figured in though.
Okay, so without the snack shack, we're at 3 million.
Right.
We're over budget.
So it makes no sense to me to even be talking about the snack shack at this point. I think what we should do is have John go and represent the snack shack. Snack shack was the ad alternate. We know that. We're already at the budget of 3 million. So why are we talking about the snack shack at all? Why is it even an option at this point? Let's stick with the 3 million plan, and then a year from now, when things are settled down, let's revisit the whole restaurant RFP, snack shack RFP, whatever it is. Once we have a parking study done, and maybe the state does their study of the traffic flow, because I know that we have requested that, correct? With the sidewalks, didn't we request?
We've requested a sidewalk. We have not requested a traffic study.
Would they do that with the sidewalks, or no? That's, no,
It's,
okay.
two separate things.
Septic.
John, so I guess my question is, if you go before the
Septic is fine.
Seaport grant and say that that we're over budget on the project, town meeting voted $3 million, the project's coming out more, so there's some question now, which we're still waiting on a legal opinion to be fair, which you may or may not have by then, and that it may have to go back to town meeting. I mean, I imagine they could award the grant contingent upon the town voting the snack shack if it's that important to them, correct?
Mr. Chairman, what I'd like to say is we're going to do this project, and this project now is estimated at 3.6 million instead of the 3 that the estimate was upon application. And we have a $3 million appropriation instead of the 2 that I listed in the application. And with that $1 million, we can get this project done.
I know what you'd like to say, but if you don't
I
get
thought you
that-
were asking me.
No, if you don't get that vote from the board, can you explain to them that there is some question on.
Mr. Chairman, I can explain whatever your direction is to me. I mean, I'll go and explain if you, whatever you want me to, whatever the
John.
direction of the board is.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think what everybody's confusing here is whether you have enough money versus whether you have enough appropriation. Even if you had $5 million worth of available sources, if the town meeting only appropriated $3 million, you still need to go back and ask them. I mean, there's a difference here. It's not the money, it's the appropriation.
That's not, I mean, I don't want to
You
get,
have to
I don't want
identify,
to get into
you have to identify
technicalities.
funding sources, so that absolutely is true. You
For-
can't just ask
for-
a town meeting to do
Let Chris
something.
talk.
And just, I get the sense for the board, I am kind of on the same page as John, whatever the board wants to reconcile behind. But I just want to make sure we have accurate information that's out there. We have chapter 90, we get it $700,000. There's no appropriation at town meeting, it's a grant that's given to us and we use it on the roads. So grants can be awarded outside of the town meeting cycle and can be used legally. That's why we're having John Giorgio research that to see, is it subject to appropriation or is it similar to the chapter 90 allocation where it can be spent directly?
Well, let's go in another direction,
it's a
because in
reimbursement
addition to
grant.
that, I was going to say, I don't care whether it's a restaurant or a snack shack, a lease has to be approved by town meeting for the length of time we're talking about.
Well, we do have the lease approved for the snack shack for up to 10 years already. That was approved last year at town meeting. If we were to do the restaurant, and I pointed this out before, if we wanted to go 30 or 40 years, that
We
would
would have-
absolutely need to go to town meeting.
So, Janelle?
So Chris, though, you just said you were likening this to Chapter 90 funds,
Mhm.
but that's not a reimbursement grant. This is a reimbursement grant.
Chapter 90 sure is a reimbursement grant. We spend the money and get reimbursed for up to that amount. The grant contract acts as the appropriation document.
So you don't need to have any type of town meeting
Correct. And I'm just saying, there are some circumstances in which that's not necessary. That's the only point of saying that.
But if we,
It may be most prudent to go to town meeting and ask for it.
Larry?
if we were to decide tonight that we want to go with the original plan, and that comes to $3.6 million, and we got the C grant, and then we would go to town meeting and ask for approval of using the other $600,000 to complete the project. Is that where we are? I'm just trying to simplify it into something I can get to. And so if we gave that approval tonight, we would in essence say that, and we got the money, we'd go ahead and we'd go back, and then we'd go back to town meeting, and I'd look for the language to say, do you agree that we spend this money for the snack shop?
Yeah, as long as town meeting approves it, it's fine with me.
But that's where we are now.
Yep.
And that's in my motion.
Hang on.
The one we did here.
Well, we need to get a
Hang on, hang on,
discussion.
hang on,
We
hang
need-
on.
I have
We
a
need to get a
Hang on.
discussion sometime.
Hang on.
Is there a letter to
John.
follow?
Done.
Mr. Chairman, you know, this grant requires a 20%. We're responsible for at least 20%, which we're well exceeding with our appropriation. So when I said reimbursement, I mean, that's how we've exercised these grants, is we submit, we submit invoices once we spend the money, and then we get money from the grant. We utilize that money from the grant. So, Chris, I don't know if that means it's a reimbursement grant or not. We're responsible for at least 20% of the project based upon the conditions of the grant.
Thank you, John.
Okay?
Julie?
So I have a question. So in terms of going forward and going backwards, so in the past, have we gone back to town meeting when we've been $500,000 over? It's a question. We have a project and we're $500,000 over, and we've said we're gonna build a community center for $7 million. And it cost us $7,500,000. Did we have to go back to town meeting for that extra $500,000?
Yeah,
Chris?
I think in general, if it's taxpayer money, then yes, absolutely. General fund money, you have to go back to town meeting for. If it's a grant allocation, it's dependent upon the grant.
So,
So grants are a little bit of a different animal. That's the only point that, so on Muddy Creek, Muddy Creek's a
Muddy
good
Creek, yeah,
example
yeah.
that I think we knew we had one We knew we had two, and those were included in the appropriation, because
We basically went back for the difference.
we then went and got a NOAA grant after the fact that borrowing, the article gave us the ability to go back and get additional grants. We got a NOAA grant for an additional 300,000 that we did not need to appropriate for, but that project came up short. We had exhausted all the grant funds, so when we went to taxpayer money, we had to definitely go to
Okay.
town meeting.
So fire station, we're building a new fire station in East
Without
Harwich.
any grants, we would
Right, if
absolutely
we,
have to. go
now
back.
let's just say somehow they got a grant.
It depends upon the wording of the grant.
So if the fire station was $5 million and we suddenly got a grant, and it was $4 million, we would still go back through this process?
Depends on what we said prior to the process, in my mind, because that's where I'm stuck.
Yeah, there's
We
also,
asked the questions, and the questions were answered, that any grants would offset the cost of the project.
But that wasn't in the language at town
Sure.
meeting. So that's what I'm asking, because my thing is, if we're gonna do this, then we gotta do it to every project going forward, if that's what we're saying the stipulations are.
Hopefully, we never let another project go to town meeting without a quote.
Well, I think we've had multiple projects go over and not have adequate quotes.
So,
restaurants in excess of the
direction, let's
scope.
finish this. Now, we've talked about it plenty. Direction for John going to the Seaport grant. And that is the, and my position is that town meeting should approve any extra expense on this project. They should have a chance to vote on it.
So if I can just, I think Larry's motion, if I understand his intent correct, is that it would be to accept the $1 million grant as, based on the plan as presented, subject to appropriation of the grant at the annual town meeting.
That's correct.
But I might also say, to your question, we're safe if we're doing that, because then that simple language that Chris just brought up is fine. But the scenario that your suggestion, we haven't run up against a situation where we change the scope of the work.
I think,
I mean, this is within the scope of what they approved. If we do anything addition to that,
Then we
you
have to go back to
definitely would
town
have to go to
meeting.
town meeting.
If we did, you mean anything
Yeah,
with the
but-
restaurant, but
Yeah.
then the restaurant is a totally different ball of wax. The
Absolutely.
restaurant would be paid for, we're not asking for taxpayer
But
money.
you're still changing the
Yeah,
scope
I
of the
get
project.
that, but we're not, that's not a money issue.
But that's a good question.
and Larry's
At-
motion would allow us to do anything between now and then, and give John direction to go
Right.
to Seaport.
But it takes us back to town meeting to get approval on how we spend it.
That's right.
As long
that-
as we know that it doesn't jeopardize those funds. If
We'd
it
have to-
jeopardize those funds in any way,
No, I don't think it would. We'd have to go back for town meeting if we did consider the restaurant. That's a
Yeah.
different animal.
right, but my,
Doesn't shut, well, my point, it doesn't completely shut the door on that,
That's right.
right,
but it gives us, what I was trying to get at was an endpoint we could help John at.
so I guess my question to your motion, though, is what are we making this motion under the guise that there's no jeopardy to the $1 million? If so when he
Well,
goes,
I think the intent of the motion is if John goes, and just use the example, the project we anticipate is 3.6 million. The town anticipates asking for the authorization to go to the 3.6. We will use 600,000 to finish the project and 400,000 as offset, which we had
Okay.
originally had in the application.
That's right.
John,
Second that.
Will you?
Who seconded
hang
it?
on, let John speak.
I'm a bit confused, so I just want to if I can, I would prefer to be in a position that when I go in front of the Lieutenant Governor and the rest of the members of the Seaport Council, the project that I'm saying that I'm going to brief that we're going to construct, that they've reviewed and approved, is the project that we're going to do. So I not get called on the carpet when we don't do a snack shack, instead we do a 100-seat restaurant.
Fair.
So
right, that's exactly my point. If he's gonna go and testify, we're saying, we want this $1 million, we've approved this project, and by the way, we're 600 over and we have to go back to town meeting. If they turn around and say to him in any way, that jeopardizes the project. what is he supposed to say?
Come back to us and we talk about it.
He's in a hearing in front of the lieutenant governor. You
They're
don't
not
get to
gonna-
go, I got to dial a
So
friend.
you think that, you honestly think, you think that,
You don't get to say, excuse me,
no,
Ms.
so you don't,
Polito."
so you don't think that he can go there and say the project's $600,000 over budget
I'm
and the
not
board
saying-
hasn't approved it yet?
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is,
That's
if you're sitting in front of them and somebody says to you, well, wait a minute, we're not gonna approve
I'd be
this
honest.
now.
I'd just be honest and
Well,
say it's
he is being
$600,000 more and we don't have the appropriation for it yet. Leo?
Thank you again for allowing me to speak. I know that this is really not a public meeting, but, a public hearing, but a public meeting. But just to back up your concerns about, I know we're not going to jeopardize losing this grant, but for the sake of making it even more confusing, let's pretend that we're in budget. We have an application that we gave the state saying we were going to spend $3 million. We've spent $3 million. There's no reason why you cannot accept this $1 million grant, offset that $3 million that you have spent already on the project, and give them notification that, oh, by the way, we are going to go back to town meeting and look for an appropriation of a little bit more because we came in over budget, period. But the application clearly stated that you were going to spend $3 million, the town was going to put up $2 million, and you were going to use their $1 million to offset it. Well, you've done that. You've appropriated $3 million, you've spent $3 million, you're going to take $1 million from them, offset that, and then in good faith, you're going to go back to town meeting and say, listen, we need a little bit more, we got a grant, and as Don said, we're not looking to increase your taxes anymore, because, by the way, you've already appropriated us $3 million, and you've raised your taxes $3 million. All we need is language and a motion that lets you appropriate a little bit more money, because you did not do that at town meeting. You only gave us $3 million. So we're only looking for an appropriation vote at town meeting. And it doesn't jeopardize the grant at all, because you can use the grant to offset the $3 million you already spent and you've already appropriated. So it's really, it's not as difficult as we're making it.
Thank you.
And I think we can make John's life real easy by saying, yeah, look, we did it. We appropriated $3 million. We built it. Thank you. The money's going to go to offset it.
Okay, so respectfully, I don't disagree on what he said. So.
All right, well then, why don't you make a motion?
He did, and I seconded
He has
it.
a motion and a second, so you have a motion.
Can you read the
and a
motion again, so that everyone understands what it is?
second to accept the $1 million grant consistent with the diagram shown to town meeting, and the appropriation would be, the grant would be subject to appropriation at the annual town meeting.
Yeah, I think that gets us there,
And that's what I second.
because that gives flexibility on what they,
Okay, any
Just what
discussion?
Leo described.
Any discussion on the motion? Julie?
If Leo is correct in the way he's phrasing it, and John doesn't have any issue with standing in front and getting the money for us, then I'm okay with that. However, if there's any issue, then I say he calls you.
I'm fine with that. Janelle, discussion?
So I'm just a little confused. Are we starting the snack shack now, or are we not starting the snack shack now? Because
We're waiting for
snack
town
shack was
Have to wait
over
for
3
town
million,
that's waiting for
right?
For town meeting.
We're waiting for town meeting, but what about the septic?
But we
the
can,
septic will start.
but we can go forward.
We'll look at that.
Yeah.
Is the septic that is being built appropriate for both the harbor master's office and the snack shack, no matter what? Not right now. So we'd have to upgrade the septic
That's
for the, so we're really not any further than when we
This is
started.
what I said at the
We're-
beginning, which
we're
is
nowhere.
the septic is gonna hold up the project.
It doesn't have to.
Well, we
Doesn't
are
have to.
somewhere, because if we don't do anything, we don't get the
Does
grant
have to.
and we don't get the snack
So
shack.
one more question.
Hey, how did it not?
Was the snack shack, when you made the application, John, was it clear on the grant application that the snack shack was an ad alternate, as it was clear to us when you presented?
It was not, we didn't have the bid yet. We had, this application went in well before the bid,
Right.
And it was an estimate,
and it was an estimate.
but town meeting appropriated only 3 million. So my thought is that we should accept the grant without the snack shack. Because we're already at 3 million without the snack shack. And then go back to town meeting with a whole separate article about building a snack shack.
Well, I thought
Don't include that with this grant at all to jeopardize anything.
That's what his motion would do.
the motion
That
would do
isn't-
that, so.
It-
And we don't want to go
Right.
back to say we've changed the scope.
But
We don't want to do that, we'll
Yeah, risky
totally
for you.
jeopardize.
I think my motion covers that, because
Yeah,
it,
you do? We don't want to say leave the snack
We have
shack
to-
out, that's what he filed with.
that's what he filed for. The motion requires us to go back to town meeting and get approval of the snack shack, spending the money for the snack shack.
400,000.
But we take the money in the meantime.
Right.
In the meantime, what if somebody wanted to build a snack shack and didn't cost us $400,000?
John?
No, sir, I don't have anything else. In case I needed to.
Okay,
answer a question.
gotcha.
That's- yeah.
All right, any other discussion on the motion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I guess I too, if they say it doesn't
5-0.
jeopardize that.
Okay, moving on.
Makes sense to me.
Okay, that was fun.
Doesn't make sense to me.
We all set with that? Okay, new business. Recommendation to appoint Randall Pond as Housing Authority Representative to the Community Preservation Committee, term to expire May 15th, 2018. Anyone have any discussion on this? We didn't receive the minutes that we had asked for. Don, go ahead.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, I think.
this,
There are some minutes, but they're not.
If you're
very
gonna talk, please go out in the hallway. We still have a meeting going on.
the public, I am sure, is somewhat confused because this kind of continuing issue looks like we're having some sort of. I'll wait for our meeting to continue. I just want to make sure that the public understands with clarity about this, because this is not a Hatfields and McCoy's thing with the Board of Selectmen and the Housing Authority. Looking at this, we've been very consistent through the last 6 months that we get approved minutes, and then we act on those approved minutes. They couldn't have approved the minutes in time for the agenda because they didn't have a meeting until January, what is it, 30th?
No, they didn't have that meeting, right?
Well, but they didn't even schedule to have that meeting
That's what
until.
I'm saying.
We got hammered
I was gonna-
for Michael looking at minutes that were, quote, draft minutes about 4 months ago, because until we vote them, they aren't minutes. They may very well have taken that action, but we're not in a position to know that. And in addition, it looks like they wanted to lawyer up to see if they could argue their way through legal counsel to accept their original recommendation. So I don't see how we act on this. And I also don't want the public thinking that this is like a personal animus at all, because honestly, I mean, the threshold's pretty simple. You take the action on a posted meeting, you vote the action, you come back in the subsequent meeting and accept the minutes where that action happened, you forward it to the Board of Selectmen, and we can act on it. And it wasn't, and again, I'm gonna say, we never said to them, you are not allowed to have an ex officio member to the Community Preservation Committee. We said, the one that you presented did not fulfill the requirements that we had, give us another. And on that basis, I don't see how we do anything tonight.
Julie?
So, yeah, I was gonna attend that meeting, and I looked on the website looking for, the actual time and all, and then I actually called and I spoke with, I think it was Ann, and there wasn't any meeting room reserved, and they hadn't come for keys, so I didn't realize, I thought you found something out after that, because that was the 30th, and wasn't out.
Larry?
I'll trust Don and Julie's opinion. When I first read it, they do have a document in here that that the board voted and they considered it candidates, but I guess the question is that those weren't minutes, and that's what you're objecting to?
Well, they weren't voted. They were gonna vote them at the 30th.
No, you have to bury it. I'll follow. I believe you. I'll
I'm
go with this.
specifically mentioning that Michael had tried to act
Previous.
on something that looked as official
no,
as this 4 months ago, and they got mad that they weren't voted
Right,
minutes.
no, I'm fine with what I'll take your judgment.
So no action.
No.
Okay. I'm gonna pull B tonight. and not because I'm not in support of it. I did speak to the cemetery director earlier. There's a little section that's missing in this, and I want to bring it back. So Robin and I have had that conversation, and it will come back to us. So we're skipping B tonight. Next up is C, transfer of land from Board of Selectmen to the Cemetery Commission for Island Pond Cemetery. Robin?
Okay, so I just want to tell you a little bit about our project. We are turning Island Pond Cemetery and a couple pieces that are surrounding Island Pond into an arboretum. So I just want to read you a little bit from the Cemetery Commission, if you don't mind. The Island Pond Cemetery is a public garden and a historic site located and named after the large pond to the left of the burial grounds. The Harwich Cemetery Commissioners are creating the Island Pond Arboretum. The Arboretum is a botanical collection composed exclusively of trees. More commonly, a modern arboretum is a botanical garden containing living collections of woody plants that is intended for scientific study. The Arboretum will be an invaluable natural and horticultural resource for many species of plants, wildlife, and historic monumentation in the cemetery. The Arboretum will provide educational programs for visitors of all ages. The Cape Cod Regional Technical High School kids have already gone into the cemetery, indexed all of the trees, and they will be installing interpretive signage at the tree with its scientific name, the common name, and some statistics about the tree. We've been working with them over the past 6 months on that. The Harwich Cemetery Commission's mission is to preserve the Harwich cemeteries and to pay homage to our residents who built this town and made it what it is today. So we owe it to our ancestors in that their monuments are not forgotten, but their contributions are still remembered for future generations to come. The Cemetery Commission is hoping to educate the public about the historic importance of our cemeteries. The mission of the proposed Arboretum in Island Pond is to engage, educate, and enrich the lives of our constituents to become better stewards of our local history and of the environment. The Cemetery Commission is working with a collaboration with the Conservation Agent, the Cape Cod Regional Technical High School, the Monomoy Regional School District, bird watchers, local historians to create the Arboretum. We have many objectives we are going to obtain for the Arboretum. The first is to provide educational guided walking tours on the species of trees. The second was to create a wildlife informational brochure on the species of birds and mammals, which was already indexed by the Conservation Trust by BSC Group, to create a plan for future plantings and landscape enhancements for the cemetery. The Conservation Agent is going to be planting butterfly gardens and perennial gardens and we're going to be doing some with the school children at Monomoy Regional. Fourth, we're going to continue with the monument preservation and documentation of the local historic figures. And then finally, I am in the process of writing a grant to create a mobile app that will allow for self-guiding tours in the cemetery property. So whether visitors come in on the bike trail, they could pull up the app, walk through, they can identify and find trees, or they can find someone who is buried within the cemetery. Or we have several women authors that are buried in the cemetery. They could go right up to the monument. They could go up to George Weeks, who was our first minister here in that town, go up to his gravesite, push on the app, and it would say he was born in 1683, moved to Harwich, married one of the Deborah Wing, and was the pastor at the church. So, I mean, it's a very interpretive app that we are hoping to get the grant for, and by strategically partnering with the school districts, I believe we have a good shot at getting it. Part of it, we have to work with the STEM curriculum, which is science, technology, reading, engineering, art, and math, to achieve the Monomoy vision. So it's been great. I've been working with Carla over at the Monomoy Regional School District, and she's so excited about it. So by partnering with our local historic societies, bird watchers, and the Cape Cod Regional Tech, as well as the Monomoy Regional School District, the Harwich Cultural Arts Center, and the Chamber of Commerce, and others, we'll be working on guided tours and will develop a multifaceted learning experience. This opportunity will not only benefit the visitors, but will excite everyone to contribute to the history educational experiences, which is the beauty of Island Pond Cemetery. So in part of that, becoming a recognized Arboretum, you have to have a certain amount of acreage. So I'm working with Amy Uzowski with the Conservation Trust to the land to the left of the cemetery, which is 7 acres, which will remain in its state that it is now. So that is just for walking trails. And we will identify and put signage in there for trees. The parcel that I'm in front of you today is the one that's in, and you guys all have your little map. So it's the red one. Most of that land that's in the red, which is under the Board of Selectmen right now, is in kind of a wetland area, except with the exception of the part that's to the very front on the left-hand side. I don't know if many of you people don't know that we only have 10 full-body burial spaces left in Island Pond at this point. It is almost completely full. By you guys transferring this parcel to me, it will give us a place for that people could park. We would have a parking area, which is right in the middle, that's down in that little loop at the bottom there. And then all of along the red side would create about 60 more burial spaces. Actually, it'll be 120 at $800 a piece, which would bring in $96,000 of revenue for the cemetery department, and also create burial spaces for people who want to be buried there.
Thank you,
Have
Robin.
any questions for me?
Thank you, Robin. Larry, you want to start?
I have no, I just appreciate all the work you've done on it, Robin.
Thank you.
Julie?
So the section that's the outline in yellow to the right,
All the yellow space is the cemetery currently. It's
Okay.
18 acres, yeah.
so that red section in the middle is the
Yeah, which
wetlands?
is the Board of Selectmen,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just wetlands, okay.
yes.
That
Not all
piece
of
up
it.
here is all wetland.
So all of this.
Yeah, the
and
only
this-
thing they
Where the
can use
blue, where the blue is on the map, it's color-coded. There's green and then blue. The blue is the wetlands.
nothing else.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Janelle?
I think it's great.
Thank you.
Thanks for all your innovation, and in case anybody out there doesn't know, Robin won the town recognition at the MMA and for the pet cemetery, pet burial ground, not cemetery. So I think this is great. This is the next award.
Thank you.
Don?
I've spoken enough tonight. Thank you for your work.
Can I get a motion?
Well, just, Mr. Chairman, if we could ask Robin to put together the warrant article language and have that be submitted to the office so that way we can get
Yep.
that incorporated.
Do you want a motion and support or just consensus, Chris? Is that,
Why don't we do a motion? I know staff likes motion.
Don?
Wait, I just have a quick question. I thought because it's selectmen land, we, as a board, can take a vote to transfer it. Am I wrong?
Town meeting has to approve it. We can vote, but town meeting has to approve transfer land
So we're taking a vote
To
to...
support.
Okay.
and bring it before.
And
town
that's my motion. I motion that we support the transfer of land from the Board of Selectmen at the request of the Cemetery Commission to the Cemetery Commission for Island Pond Cemetery.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded to approve. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
Wastewater Support Committee information. This came forward because I requested some information from David Young to go to our new Wastewater Support Committee, and he asked the question who that information flow was supposed to come from, because apparently Larry had asked for something, Chris had asked for something. So this is to establish the chain of command. Chris?
Yeah, I think the original intent here, and we did have a discussion, David and I, that the new wastewater support committee, I don't think can have David at his beck and call. So one of the things that we wanted to have set up was to have Dan Pelletier, who I think Dan is going to join us tomorrow morning at that meeting. So Dan will be kind of the repository for information and will be the staff support that we used to have David provide. I think what I had asked David for tomorrow is to come in and just provide all the additional information that he has, so that way we can stack the committee with the information they need in order to operate. The committee will have to go through the 4-page material for town meeting, the information guide. But I think he's just looking at, there's a lot of chefs in the kitchen. He's looking for some kind of direction. What I was trying to do is that if requests from the committee could be channeled through myself or through Dan Pelletier. Dan joins me at a lot of these meetings. then that can be the chain of command.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I felt this was relevant for the conversation, but I spent the better part of this weekend in various venues, at Jimmy's funeral wake, at my church, even at a baby shower. The people were coming up to me saying, well, when is this, and what is that, and how's it going to affect me? Is it mine? I mean, when do I do this? How do I contact it? And even going to that information meeting, I didn't come out of it feeling proficient enough for me to say the answers to those questions. That's why this committee was revitalized in that direction. But I urge CDM Smith, really, come up with a timeline that shows how this affects people and when it affects people, because that really is not common knowledge.
Thank you, Don. Janelle?
I don't have anything.
Julie?
Yeah, one question, and I sat through that too, and somebody then asked me after, and I thought, I thought I knew the answer to this, but I don't. So when we talked about how you can say where you want your connection and what's best for you, and but when is the homeowner supposed to say, yeah, I figured out what's best for me? When does that process start?
They're working on putting together a more detailed timeline to start to answer those exact questions.
Larry?
I take the point. One of the things, and Sharon's going to speak here in a moment as well, but we do, in terms of communication, to get to that point, I think what our committee would like to see, is probably have a definite path. And for me, that path is probably, would go to you, Chris, and then you can decide whether it goes to Dan or not. And so that that is very direct. There's one person that, and then that there's and then their interest is response. Either, either it's done as soon as you can, or there's a deadline when it can be done. We now have a newly formed 5-member committee that Sharon is chair of, and we did. Just advertised, it's been mentioned, there are meeting tomorrow morning at 8:30. And we've asked the committee's asked David Young of CDM Smith to come in and, for lack of a better term, to provide a data dump, if you will. I think the presentation they made on the 16th was well done, but it did leave a lot of questions below that, some details. Peter Hughes and I, at the direction of the committee, met with Dave Young last week for an hour or so to give him some guidance on what to present tomorrow, to get that going. One of the questions that he was asked, and I think he actually emailed something today, was a better fine-tuned time schedule, because everyone has questions. Quite frankly, we're kind of in an interesting position in my neighborhood. We all were anxious to get this going, to convince people it was needed, and now everyone is anxious to get it started, and we're probably 2 years away, so we can back away a little bit and get some of these details. But what we're asking, David Young to present tomorrow, and I'm hoping people, and it'll be televised, by the way, is where we are now in more detail, because that's there, and then a series of questions, actions that we need to get done before town meeting, what the time schedule is. We need to know better what the schedule is for implementation, the connections. We need a firmer a fix on what the cost is going to be. The costs now are several years old, and we want to do 600 homes if those gone, or up or down. And he has some others. What we don't know, that famous phrase. What else might I need that? I think I covered my points. I think if we understand who communicates through Chris, and I've asked, my neighborhood, they have their own neighborhood group there looking at wastewater. I've asked them to interact with Sharon and the committee to be sure that all comes forward. I'm hoping others do that, because they'll be our focus point for getting the information out and answering these questions so we're all comfortable.
Thank you, Larry.
Sharon?
So my comments, Chris, just are, and I appreciate that Dan Pelletier was your choice. and not yourself, because it's budget season and you're busy. I thought my email to Dave was fairly direct. They wanted some maps, they wanted some of the material. And I think he took more time in his response to try and figure out who should be asking him than just getting the information out there. We have 3.5 months left, roughly.
Short time.
3.5 months left to get all the information out there on $22.5 million ask at town meeting. There should be absolutely no delay in what our wastewater support committee gets and when they get it.
Yeah.
So I can't emphasize enough that, Chris, if you speak to the consultant and let them know that when asked, as immediate as possible, and no delay because of something else, because it's very important that they get started with this information to the public. Sharon?
Sharon Flieger, Wastewater Support Committee Chairman. Have a few comments to make. I did receive the information that Dave Young sent out. One of the things on our very first meeting that I presented to Chris was, what did he and the board want from this support committee? And his comment was outreach to the town. And we had said what we were going to do is have every other Tuesday morning meetings, and we were going to have once a month on a it's now changed to Thursday, excuse me, in the evening for the people to come. We haven't set up that first one yet. It's supposed to be in February. And we did request, we needed some up-to-date maps, not what was shown last year. Where are we now? Now, I did take a look at what he just sent for tomorrow. Granted, it's probably not going to be everything he's going to present, but they're timelines. They're timelines. To Don's point, I think the people are looking for detail. They want some more detail. You know, to say that we're going to know sometime in April 90% of what the layout's going to be. There's still a number of things that they're waiting for. One is, other than from the town of Barnstable, what other ways are we going to help the people? All right, and I'm just bringing, these are some of the questions that I hear. All right. If anybody actually read the certificate that we got from the state, one of the things they said was, as the town, we're supposed to be supplying a list of qualified, I'm going to say, engineers and or plumbers. All right, I don't know who's going to recommend to these people how to get their sewering done. I wouldn't even know what kind of engineer to look for. All right, so these are some of the things, and these are only just a few of the things that I think that we need in detail. When I looked at what he gave was the timelines of when this would be done or when that would be done. What I'm hoping for tomorrow or shortly thereafter is some detail. If we're going to have a town meeting or a meeting of the Wastewater Support Committee where the town people can come, I don't want to stand there and not be able to answer some questions. Now, I'm not going to answer detailed engineering questions, but I need to have a feeling of what this project is about and where are we with it. Not that it's going to be in April sometime. You know, give me something that I can stand there and talk to the people about, because these people are they want to know. I mean, I've actually been stopped in the grocery stores already.
Good. I'm going to cut you off, Sharon.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, I expect that you guys will flesh some of that out.
Yes, but you know, just as
No
the
pun intended.
saying to the group that we do definitely need,
Right.
so that the board knows, not just, you know, with Chris being there tomorrow, but that the board recognizes that for us to be successful as a committee, we're going to need that information, and we need detailed information
Thank you.
going forward.
Gotcha.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Just to that, I don't want to belabor that, but they are in the process. They get the topo maps done, and they're actually trying to figure out what side of the road that the pipe's going to go on. So
And you're going to
there's-
get into that in your update in a little while.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
fair enough.
We'll get into that. Thank you. Appoint Selectman Ballantyne to serve on Cape Cod Water Protection Collaborative for a term of February 25th, 2018 to February 28th, 2019. So Larry, you were on and you were appointed until February 28th of 2016. And I think you were failed to be reappointed, but you have attended
Have
all
been.
of those
Yeah, I
meetings
have,
and you have
yeah.
been our representative. So the point in this really is to put the second 3 years into play, and then when it expires, we'll put you in for another 3 years. So the recommendation tonight would be, I think that should be February 5th, because that's tonight, until February 28th, 2019, unless any other board member has a problem with it. Discussion, Don?
No, I'd be willing to make a motion.
Go ahead and make a motion.
I move that we appoint Mr. Ballantyne to that position, effective immediately and with the expiration date of February 28th, 2019.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Next one was something we talked about last week, revenue allocation for water department cell tower lease, which isn't done yet. They're going out for an RFP, but this really is looking for the board support on allocating that money to the housing trust if that passes at town meeting. Discussion?
Yep.
Don?
Move.
So moved.
Julie?
Yep.
I'm good.
I second the motion.
Was it a motion?
Yep.
So I guess, Chris, it's hinged on the passing of the housing trust at town meeting, but, and the RFP, I
Yeah, pay
guess.
attention.
Intention is for this board to unanimously support the money going into our housing trust. That was quick.
Got a vote on.
Okay, the next one, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Got a motion in a second.
Thank you. Establish a two-member Board of Selectmen Personnel Board. This was a request of one board member and something that I've been thinking of with everything that's going on personnel-wise, and the most recent vacancy of the Assistant Town Administrator, and some of the other positions that we're looking at, IT, reallocation of employees upstairs. I thought it would be good if the board would get a little more involved in this as far as the overall structure of what we're looking for, so I brought it up just for conversation. Don, you want to start?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some people actually asked me about this, reading into it. It's not really a personnel board, but it really delves into organizational structure.
Right.
And on that basis, I'd support it. I mean, if we got involved with the day-to-day operation of personnel, I wouldn't.
That wouldn't be the
That wouldn't be.
Yeah,
that
I know,
wouldn't
but
be it.
people saw what they saw. So with that in mind, I think it's a smart idea. I think just looking around at other towns, I've said in the past, whether we want a first stop legal counsel office so that we can keep some stuff in here and then give specialized advice to KP Law, a human resources person, a contracting person, whether it's in the confines of our total staff right now, but we have a staffing plan that needs to be amended when we do stuff like this, so we should be involved in developing that. And so far, we haven't actually done that. Our surrounding towns are further ahead of us in handling these things.
Janelle?
I agree.
Julie?
I agree too, yeah. I think it's important.
Larry?
Yeah, I brought this up a couple of times in various forums, but I think it's important that we be more involved in it. Also, I think, one thing I'm always impressed with is Harwich, is how many really qualified people we have on any subject, maybe for a reason you think, maybe because we have retired people that have had, careers in different areas, that we can be involved, but we can also ask for help where we think necessary on structure, on, where we're going. And so I support it.
Okay. Any suggestions of which two board members?
Well, why don't we add to the chair's plate a little bit more?
I was gonna,
I'd
you
like
wanna
to.
put some kind of form and function, because it doesn't
Yeah.
really, and maybe get away from the personnel board and call it,
Yeah, I think
or
We can try-
Organizational
Let's do that first, yeah.
structure.
Leo?
Yeah, I'd just like to make a suggestion, and maybe I'm having a brain skip. But if the Board of Selectmen appoint two people from the board to be the personnel board we'll use, for example, right now, they would be required under open meeting law to post meetings and keep minutes and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You might want to think out of the box. If the town administrator asks two of the selectmen to aid him in a personnel board scenario, then they're not required to meet open meeting law requirements, keep minutes, et cetera, et cetera. And I know, Chris, you've done that with asking for help with selection committees and things like that, as long as it's, I believe the way the law is written, if it's a function that the town administrator can do on his own, yet requests aid from individuals, then they're not required to post meetings.
Thank you, Leo.
Just a thought, I don't know how much you guys want to constantly post meetings every time you get together and take minutes, especially something like this.
Thank you, Leo.
Mr. Chair, let me volunteer to put some, try to put some structure together and bring it back.
You want to?
Yeah.
Okay. You work with,
I'll work with Chris.
Yeah.
And Leo, I'll give Leo a call as well, see what.
Chris, you were going to
He
say,
said he'll take the minutes.
Chris, did you have a thought on that?
Well, just two thoughts in terms of that. Actually, I think Leo has a good idea in terms of that. You know, I have Bob Lawton kind of looking at how other towns structure themselves. Bob has worked in several different places, so we can do a draft plan internally and then invite a couple folks in to kind of look at it and provide some feedback. The second thing is, you know, I don't have a full-time assistant. So I do want to try to form a kind of a search committee on the assistant. So I would like to have one member of the board sit on that search committee. Generally, I try to pick 5 people, a department head, maybe a resident. You know, it depends upon the nature of it. But I would like to this time have a board member participate in the process. So that way you see the process too that's been utilized for a while.
Larry?
I appreciate that, Chris, and I think we have to move rapidly, but I'd be reluctant to start a search committee right now because my view is we need to have a discussion of what our greatest needs are for that position. I'm not myself convinced that the position description we've had in the past is the way we should be looking forward. I can look and say we need, possibly we need to focus that on procurement, for instance, and legal aid. And maybe that's a combination, you know, legal, you know, lawyer or legal with procurement experience. So I'd like to see us look at that before we, I would not want to just automatically fill that, you know, those same skill sets that we've done in the past without looking at what we think what we need as a town.
Which was really the intent of this
Yeah, that-
personnel board, for lack of better words. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that we're on the same page. I guess my plea is, you know, I now have 1.5, myself and a half, helping.
No, yeah, we need to move rapidly. I'm
So,
just,
you know, waiting 4 months, you know, at some point, I'm gonna get burned out.
yeah.
So
No, we have to
my
move quickly,
thing
I
is,
agree.
could we look at, because we're talking about IT, we're talking about a whole bunch of different parts, and there's 22 different divisions. If we can look at administration, see how we want to restructure the assistant position, and then get that solved first, and then do the recruitment on it, we can continue to do these on a organization, you know, wide
Yeah.
basis. I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
Just a piece at a time.
Well, given that, and given Leo's suggestion, do we really need to come back with that? Chris, do you want to suggest 2 members of the board that you'd want to work with on this? And if the board agrees,
You never
then
pick your bosses, so, I mean, I don't know. If Larry's expressed an interest, then, you know, certainly I think that, and if Dawn has an interest too, then those are the 2 that I'll reach out. For the one.
you have an interest, Julie has an interest as well.
Oh, you have an interest too?
I'll put my geeky credentials up against anybody's.
So I need,
With structure
I
and
need 2 to
form.
look at the structure of the office, the assistant's position, and then 1 to sit on the recruitment once we get that to that stage. So I don't know if there's one that,
Do you want to do the
timing-wise.
recruitment, or do you
Yeah,
want
that's fine.
so who wants?
That's fine with me.
She'll do the
I'm not so interested in recruitment.
Okay.
I'm trying to get the other aspect
Okay.
sorted
It
out.
probably shouldn't be the same people anyway.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, right.
Settled?
If it were a committee of ours, it would be settled.
Well, Chris just gave the nod. Housing trust membership makeup. I thought we should start talking about this now since we're going to town meeting. Bob Lawton's been working on the housing trust, and I think he's actually well on his way to having that done. The makeup of the trust, though, I think that the board should weigh in on what the board thinks the makeup of the trust should be.
We did provide information, Mr. Chairman, in the materials that Yarmouth has the town administrator, a member of the Board of Selectmen, a member of the Housing Committee, a member of CPC, and then a citizen at large. I think by statute, we definitely have to have a selectman member now on there. They changed the law, so that's required. And then I volunteered pretty early on to try to have form and function to it. But the other three, I think, are open for discussion.
Don, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question, and it relates to our charter. I mean, my head explodes just reading that, and never mind knowing what Yarmouth's is, so I don't know what they're operating under. Has anyone asked KP Law to give an opinion relative to the two selectmen on this? Because I think that it could be loosely construed as being prohibited. Not that we can't change the charter, but our charter says that you can't appoint a selectman to a committee over which they have appointment authority. And I understand this is a trust, but I'm not sure whether it's enough different, whether it wouldn't fall under that section. And if it does, I think it's a good idea, and I would actually argue to change the charter to say, except as provided in section whatever, that you're not allowed to appoint. It's a good thing to have when you're spending money, the elected representatives in this, but my question is, has anybody actually asked KP Law whether this is actually okay under the charter, or should we change the charter?
I'll send it over. I don't think I asked that specific question.
Good question. Chris, I think I looked at a few other towns. Chatham does not have the town administrator in there. Bourne does not have the town administrator in there. And one other town, I've only found 5 towns that have done this, and 4 of the 5 did not have the town administrator in there. Brewster's still on it. What they put in their language was, or delegate of the administrator. And I'm only saying that because the wastewater project, you know, you've openly said that that takes up the bulk of your time, and that's not going away. That's going to be extremely busy. Along with budget and everything else you're doing, I'm not sure that it makes sense to put that much responsibility on you. Certainly you can oversee it, but you could at least have the ability to put somebody else on there. I think we should explore that language. As far as the structure here goes, I mean, it's kind of, it was automatically assumed the chair would be the town administrator. I think that should be the same as anything. It should be voted who the chair of that committee or the trust is, probably within the trust. CPC, I mean, we had this conversation before. CPC representative, I mean, obviously, I think you could set it up so the board, I looked at the language of some of them, and the board has to confirm the appointment, as we had that same issue with the housing authority. But there was some concern on this board about having, or the weighted housing on the CPC committee. Now we're asking for CPC and a housing person to be on this trust, the way that this is set up. And I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense. I almost think it should be town administrator or someone he appoints, a board member, and then 3 at large, whether they are elected or interviewed. Thoughts, Julie?
So, I would think too, with the housing trust, it would be helpful to have, say, Charlene with the planning background on
I was
it.
gonna say,
So,
yeah.
I mean, that's
Planner,
a planner.
instead of the
I mean,
administrator.
Right.
Don?
I would agree.
Agree with changing the structure of this? I mean, because this is something, again, Bob Lawton's working on.
Yeah,
so
I wouldn't, well, my 2 cents, I wouldn't remove the administrator. I mean, I know it's a lot of work, Mr. Chairman, but I think that Yarmouth has been successful because the administrator is on there. I think adding as one of the designees instead of CPC, have the town planner, that I think makes a tremendous amount of sense.
But you could change, and that's what I was agreeing to, you could change the language to say the town administrator or his or her designee.
Yeah, that's
Right,
all I was
right.
asking, Chris. Not necessarily to take you out, but give the option.
Yep.
Um,
And then
And I
town
think
planner.
it
makes- Absolutely, I
Town
would-
planner
I
would be
think the
one of the
planner.
3.
Absolutely, I'd opt for the planner over any CPC, because there's already like a heavy weighted, there's 2 different, there's an authority and a committee that
Right.
get a seat at the table already.
you know,
Are we still gonna have the committee?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for now anyway.
Okay.
Once we get the housing coordinator, we might consider that maybe we don't need that, but for now, yes.
What about, should we, R2?
Yeah.
And so I assume we'd have a representative from the Housing Committee on this.
We could,
Yeah.
or we could make them, an advisory.
Well, yeah, do we want everyone at large, or do we want to put a couple, I agree with CPC is a little problematic, but do we want to have some, direction on the others?
Yeah,
Well-
I think more than one person from the community should be involved.
All right,
Okay, thank you for let me speak. I read over what Yarmouth is, how they've set theirs up, and they have the town administrator as the chairman. My only question there was, what would their term be? Everybody else has a 2-year alternating term. The town administrator, that could be forever. Well, not forever, but, for a long, long time. That could be good or whatever.
right.
Yeah.
So,
And, Yarmouth has one member from the board, one member from CPC, one member from their housing committee. They call it something else, but it's a housing committee. And then one member at large.
right,
And that seems to work pretty good. I think so. And I think, and we discussed it this evening at our meeting at the housing committee, and they all agreed that this would be the most acceptable way
thank you.
for us. Thank you.
So, we've got right now, town administrator or designee, a board member, planner, and now we have two more positions. Do we want to do those two at large so the selectmen can decide?
The housing committee, if you wanted the housing committee to have a.
One out of the
I would.
housing,
Yeah,
I
one
do.
out of the
I
housing.
do.
one out of the housing committee, one at large,
One at
Housing
large,
trust, it makes
yeah.
sense.
Right.
you know?
I'd like to see more people from the community involved. I'd like to see 2 at large and the designee actually be the planner at this point. And as Art said, it poses a problem to have the town administrator not have terms anyway, so maybe the designee, the town administrator has a designee that has terms.
We don't have to approve that they'd automatically be the chair, and I already said I think that should be elected amongst the 5. I don't think that should, just as we do it, it should be an elected, the chair should be elected, in my mind.
Do we, I mean, because that would be 2 staff. That would be town administrator and the planner. I don't know, I would think, just the planner and 2 at large. I'd like to just get some input from the community a little bit more.
All right, so give this some thought and we'll bring it back. I'm not gonna, there's no sense in debating this all night, but please give it some thought. Bob, when's Bob gonna, when does that have to be submitted, Chris? It just has to be done for the,
Yeah, we have the warrant already done, the article's done, so we have a
Okay.
placeholder.
so we can change the structure of this if we,
Yes.
okay. New approval for executive session minutes. It was pointed out to me that we probably should not be approving our executive session minutes in open session. I sent an email to John Giorgio, he did agree. Said executive session minutes should be approved in executive session with a line item on that agenda specifying it, or we could choose to delegate someone on the board to approve those minutes, chair or any member of the board. We could delegate to the clerk, we could delegate to anybody. Anyone have any suggestions? But I'd like to change it so that we're not voting them in open session. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Reading this over, it just brought back to me, is like, there's what you're legally required to do, and there's what you morally want to do, as long as it's more than the legal part. This kind of seemed like crafted to carve out a little niche. When the purpose for the executive session no longer exists, the information becomes public. It always becomes public, no matter where you approve it.
I'm only talking about the approval.
I do, and I understand that, and I'm wondering what his concern was, because if you approve the executive session meetings even in a public session, I'm not sure that it obligates you to do anything unless the purpose for the executive session is no longer valid. I'm not I mean, I would be far more in favor of just voting them in an executive session than I would in delegating, because minutes are minutes. We all should be able to say, hey, wait, that's not what I said.
Larry?
I'm for taking John's recommendation and voting executive session and reporting out that vote's been taken at some time. You know, make it simple and just do it.
So just do it. If you
That's-
want to do it in an executive session.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I think the intent of that, similar to what we've been doing, is you'd have the discussion in executive session to make sure that everyone was comfortable with what the minutes said, and then you have the mirror for the open session that then you release it.
You made a decision.
Settled?
Yep.
Yeah.
Old business, Chris, the first one is you, reallocation of staff in the Community Development Department.
Yeah, this is one that, Mr. Chairman, you had asked me about, I had a discussion with the Labor Council had come in. We have reallocated the staff, or we're planning on reallocating the staff. We would make that effective March 5th. We have provided notice to the union in the past. We haven't heard anything back. So I would like to continue to kind of proceed that we would make those staff changes. The one thing that I would kind of amend a little bit is that the original intent was to take some of the savings and put it down into administration. The budget is much tighter than I thought it was going to be. So I don't think that there will be resources to accomplish that. So I think the staff change of taking the 2 administrative assistants and moving them up to executive assistant and increasing the hours of the conservation person up is still, I guess, what I would like to pursue.
Thank you, Chris. Larry?
No comment. I think give Chris the opportunity to reorganize this. Makes sense.
Julie?
Yeah, I would agree.
Janelle?
Mm-hmm.
Don?
Yep.
I guess my only concern, Chris, would be exactly what we talked about. The description of the job, if we're reallocating a job description in a title that's already in the union. If we choose not to fill the position, it's fine. You could do that as an administrator. If you take that job description and give a piece or the whole job description to somebody else, then the union can take exception to it.
Yeah, we're really not doing that. All we're doing is taking away that one position. The job descriptions, to your point, Mr. Chairman, already include in them servicing the window, doing customer service. Those elements are already in there. That's why we wouldn't have to change. We're just reallocating resources to have more go into a part-time position and make it a full-time position.
Okay, and then the only other concern is when we talked about this a year ago and the board approved it, I think at the time it was something that you didn't think that we needed or didn't fit into the budget. And now we're taking a part-time conservation agent and making them a full-time agent, but
Right.
they'd be covering some of your hours in the window. Has enough changed where we really need a second full-time conservation person?
Well, I think that that's a great question. We are taking away one of the administrative assistant positions and
Right.
having that go away.
Yep.
So we're taking roughly 40,000 and then reallocating, I don't remember the exact math, 15 or 20 to that, to the assistant conservation. So I think it's more, how we're just reallocating. In the workload, I actually had this discussion today, probably 60 to 70% of the inquiries that come in are for building department. We have 2 staffers assigned to building. The remaining third is probably health. So conservation, she won't be doing a tremendous amount of window work, but we do want to have that cross-training where she'll be there as needed when other staff is on vacation.
Okay. And does your projection figure in the $21,000 benefit package savings?
We're taking a full-time position and eliminating it,
So
and
it's the
taking a
same.
part-time, so it's 1-for-1.
Okay. Do you want to vote on this, Chris?
Yeah, that'd be great. You have a
Larry,
motion?
you want to make a motion?
I move we accept the administrator's proposal to reallocate staff in the Community Development Department as shown in the agenda packet.
Memo of December 21st, 2017.
Exactly.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve Chris's request, town administrator's request. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Proposed charter changes. This was brought up last week by Don. Chris was going to give the memo that's in your packet to Don before the last charter review committee, so it's really just in this packet. God bless you, in case any board members had questions on it.
I think, just as a, by way of comment, I think that we had somebody from, maybe it was at the CPC meeting, that they said the charter review bylaw hadn't seen these, so I wanted to make sure we got that material to them.
CPC.
So hopefully that is, I know, it's funny that it came out of CPC, but somebody had made mention that they hadn't seen it, so we wanted to make sure we got them the draft charter changes and bylaws.
Don?
Several things. First of all, I did convey this information to them, so that they've got it. And they're still working on finalizing their wording for the bylaw changes that put the numbers of people in committees there. With that said, since Chris brought it up, there isn't going to be anything relative to ex officio appointments or anything, because mostly that sits in the language, in the bylaws of the Community Preservation Committee. And to the extent that we have actually thrown out that other towns do it other ways, and we may want to examine how many ex officio people are required under the law, and whether we do or don't want to have that many on the CPC. It's better to be right than it is to be fast. So they're not anticipating doing anything in that area pending us looking at that whole situation. And if we want to go big and say, okay, Truro does this and Orleans does this, we may want to change what we're doing. We're going to have to rewrite that section. And if we only want to say that an ex officio member can be for 1 year only, notwithstanding the other appointments that are enumerated in the charter, it's still going to require a change. So instead of just rushing the language out, they're not going to do anything and waiting to see what direction we want to go in.
Larry?
Just one comment on on section 710, composition of appointed town agencies. This is minor, but Conservation Commission is 7 members, but they also have potential, or in their 3 associate members.
I had another comment about that. This is not going to be sufficient. I alluded to that last week. We're going to have to rework this language, because it should be in the paragraph, not as a freestanding thought. It should be in the paragraph relating to the committee that it addresses. So in addition to what Larry's saying, it shouldn't be just Board of Health 5 members on a laundry list of committees. It has to be identified in section 7-3.
Just one I caught that was not correct.
So this is going to be changed.
So I guess that's my question. Given our constant fight to get volunteers, do we really want to make these all 7-member and 9-member committees? Conservation Commission, for instance, has been short 2 for as long as I can remember, and they're having quorum problems. Planning Board doesn't want to lose one person because he doesn't want to have a quorum problem.
Some of them are statutory.
Conservation is statutory. We had hoped one time, we added associate members some years ago as a hope to get people get trained up a little bit and make it a little more interesting. But
would the
I'm
board
gonna give us an
I've had a
attaboy.
hard time filling
the
that.
board entertain dropping some of these other ones to 5 that aren't statutory, just so that we don't have the
yeah,
quorum
sure.
problems?
Yeah. No problem with that. But
We had the discussion at last year's town meeting, though, that we were going to give certain numbers to certain committees. I kind of cautioned us that that wouldn't be consistent with what we had said. Remember, all of these numbers got yanked out of the charter and are going to be placed in the bylaws.
So you're saying we'd have to go back before, we should go back before town meeting with a recommendation?
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
again, Don, we're not filling these committees. And
But I
some
do-
of them have quorum problems, and that's not fair to the public.
But I do want to give us an attaboy, because it sounds so dire. We've made significant progress in the last 6 months in terms of the number of outstanding vacancies, and also on making the town committees look like the town itself. I mean, the composition, there's more women, there's fewer vacancies. I understand where you're coming from, but I also want to recognize where we've gotten to. And it's a better place than it had been, and I think that's a good thing.
Okay. So we're all set with proposed charter changes. Everybody has what they need. Wastewater update, Chris.
So just, especially in light of the hour, kind of go through. On a discussion with Colebrook, actually had a phone call that I made the other day. We do have an opportunity. There was a $1.5 million grant that is allocated as part of a original earmark, I guess, for the town way back when. So I am setting up a meeting for, I think it's the end of next week, to have a discussion about how we can move that project forward. That grant is specifically for fish navigation, to make sure the fish can make it from Saquatucket Harbor into Grassy Pond and going through the Colebrook system. So we will have a discussion. We have continued discussions too with the folks at HCT to see about the reallocation and the changes that would be contemplated in that area. So that has some activity going on. On the East Harwich design, attended a meeting, kind of internal staff, that they are working on the design. They are looking at whether the pipe goes on the north side or south side of 137 and how deep can they get it. They did provide a list of the homes, 628. It's not just homes, but vacant parcels and everything else. So I think they are finally starting to hone in. I think as those plans get more developed and we pick neighborhoods that may need pump stations, then certainly we have to figure out, is it a town pump station or can we accomplish that with individual pump units in the homes? And that's the level of detail that they are working on. I think because of the scope of the project, I mean, you can't just design things instantly. So they probably will be closer to March when they start to get things finalized in terms of it. But I think people should know that they're in the area and they're going to be contemplated. I think that determination can be made probably sooner than later.
Chris, most of this is to get the pipe started in the ground. It's going to be another year before hookups start in people's homes.
Yeah,
correct?
once they get town meeting approval and then approval at the ballot, then they have to submit it for design and review of that. So we have to get regulatory approval from Concom and from other folks. So it is going to be, I think it's 6 to 9 months of what they anticipate for that process alone.
So to the concern about the licensed contractors and whatnot, we do have a little more time than just town meeting.
Yeah, on that, I appreciate that. You know, I attend these meetings, and part of the reason why I attend them is to then, I have a meeting, I think we meet about monthly with Chatham. Chatham does have about 10 to 12 contractors. If contractors don't perform, they get taken off the list. If they do a good job, they go on the list. And they do maintain that. They actually, they had a different name for it though. It wasn't a plumber, it was a utility installer, I think is what they called it. So they do have that list, and a lot of the names are same names for people that will be working and, you know, eligible to work in Harwich. So I think I just got that.
And that list is actually on their website, on Chatham's website.
And we'll get that to the support committee as part of it.
Yeah, we'll have that to the support committee. And then on DH.
Chris, I can help you out.
Yeah,
I
if you wanna
bailed
do
out
that
last
piece, that'd
time.
be fine.
Didn't do it just because I'll keep it briefly. Chris mentioned last time we got the grant for $150,000. It turns out that that includes Dennis, Harwich, and Yarmouth. But they added Barnstable into that to broaden the appeal. Well, it neighbors. There's some
Yarmouth.
crossover on the watershed, so it makes some sense. But that means the actual grant for the 3 towns is $100,000 for us and $50,000 to be directed towards Barnstable, but there's a chance we wouldn't have gotten that grant without that.
Wow.
We've had input from KP Law, John Giorgio, on options for special legislation. And there's, it looks like now the favorite is to bring to model a regional partnership modeled after what Mansfield, Foxborough, and Norton has done. And the hope is to, well, let me make one other comment. They've tentatively, they being the committee staff, has tentatively scheduled a meeting at the Dennis Council on Aging meeting room for March 22nd at 6 p.m. And the purpose of that meeting is to bring it'll be the selectmen from each of the 3 towns, bring us all together and update us on the status, but specifically update us on the proposed spatial legislation that we would hope to take to town meeting as a draft. And as you recall, the legislation doesn't, it does very simply will allow us to move forward and to create something. It doesn't do anything specific at this point. But the reason they've modeled it after the 3 towns is they've already had spatial legislation approved, so it gets the legal language in place. But that's it. Chris, I do have one comment, however. I note that on our website, we have the minutes from March 18th of last year, but it hasn't been updated.
Okay.
If you can go back and update, then we'll all have the minutes on the town website as well for that, for those meetings.
Chris, just one question on the Cold Brook. I know there was some discussion with Michael Locke and the Conservation Trust folks, and maybe not, I don't want to use disagreement was the wrong word, but we're still trying to figure out exactly what we're doing. Are we still there, or have we aligned a little more on that?
They wanted to refer to the, 2 experts or 2 teams of experts trying to figure out what makes the most sense. So we're trying to set up something to see how they made out.
Okay.
Still pending.
Thank you. Julie?
So I'm just wondering, with the digging of the sewer pipes in East Harwich, and I may have this wrong, but for years I've been told that there are certain fiber optic lines and things that don't go beyond 137, right? So we're gonna be doing a new fire station, plus we're digging up for a sewer. And whatever's in there that we should be pulling along the lines, we should be doing it now. For instance, in East Harwich, you can only have Comcast or Dish. You can't have Verizon. None of those, I guess, fiber optic lines go beyond 137, I believe.
I can tell you that for a fact.
Right? So I'm wondering, while we're doing all this, and clearly the fire station's gonna need to be upgraded, we should be looking at that while we're digging up everything so that we're not going backwards.
Worth a phone call to the utility company, or?
Yeah, I mean, if we could talk a utility company into coming in and doing that work.
Just seems like, I
That's
mean,
common sense,
we're
but
improving all this infrastructure, so we should be looking at those pieces of it too.
It tends to be, I did research that once, it's an expensive proposition to do it, but we need a private entity.
Well, and I did, and so from what I've heard in terms of the background on it, I heard that somebody spent a lot of time, this is in a different town, spent a ton of time looking into this and trying to bring, I think it was fiber optic in, only to find out afterwards that they were telling them it didn't exist. But it did exist because the fire stations and emergency, they have to have those lines. So then I said,
Under
well.
your cable contract, the cable company has an obligation to provide service to public buildings.
Okay.
But that's not necessarily all buildings.
Verizon's not obligated to deploy Fios anywhere.
No, I know, and I'm just saying, like, at this point, if we could do something, or to the other point of when we were talking about the internet through the commission, well, I forget the name of it, I'm totally blanking on. Yeah, Open Cape.
I attended a session with Open Cape, it's probably almost a year ago, and they were like, we want you to expand, or we want to expand, but you guys do the work, and we'll provide you the.
Well, certainly worth making a phone
Well,
call.
something, I don't know.
I don't want to talk about it anymore because it's not on the agenda. But go ahead, Chris, sidewalks.
Yeah, under Town Administrator Report, just 2 things, really. Just an update on Route 28. I did have a discussion, Lynn Cooper and myself, with the folks at District 5 about seeing if we could move forward with the sidewalk on Route 28 from Saquotucket Harbor to Harwich Port. I think that the mechanism to do that, which could be expedited, they would do the design work, and then if we paid a contractor that they had approved, that we could build the sidewalk ourselves. They're actually, what we agreed in that session, just telephone conversation, they're gonna come out and look at it and provide some kind of feedback in terms of what the level of effort it would take to get that accomplished. So we had budgeted $250,000, and hopefully they can live within that $250,000.
We also sent a letter to Representative Peak to help us with that, I believe.
Yes. So this kind of is continuation on that.
Go ahead, Leo.
Thank you. As York County Commissioner, I serve on the Metropolitan Planning Organization. And for those of you that don't know what that is, that's the group of people who allocate, put together a capital plan for all your federal and state funds that come here for your road repairs. And we actually not only have a 5-year plan that we work very tightly with, but we also have a 25-year plan. And there's expenditure of, I believe it's $20 billion is in the 20-year plan. It's pretty elaborate. One of the things that I, as a single member, have been advocating for in our meetings is that as we plan each year, and basically to try to not get into the weeds of it, but let's say we're given $8 million every year, and we're told, okay, you have to spend that $8 million in year 217. Well, after we do the projects, especially the ones that are approved and ready to move forward, sometimes there's $600,000, $800,000 left over. And because of the state and federal regulations, you cannot take that $500,000 left over and move it to the next year. It basically goes away. So, in essence, there are occasions that we lose money. I've been advocating that we have a sidewalk plan where each town kind of does their due diligence and has a plan on file. Some may be shovel-ready, some may be ready to go, some in planning, but we could then plug that number in if we have years or we have 500,000, 200,000, whatever left over, we could advocate for that. So I guess I'm going to ask you, because this is on your agenda and this does specifically say sidewalks, I guess I'm going to ask the board if maybe they can ask Link Hooper. By the way, this is a 2-stage program. I'm on the MPO, which actually does the planning and voting of the plan and the expenditure of the money. However, there's a subgroup that's made up of all the DPW directors from every town, and Link Hooper is on that. I work very closely with Link when he has issues in different areas in town that he wants to make sure is on the plan. Maybe Link can get together with a couple of his buddies and just write a real nice letter to the MPO saying, gee, it might be a nice idea if we could have a sidewalk allocation within that MPO plan. So, food for thought.
Thank you, Leo. Don?
Yeah, and actually, under the heading of everything old is new again, in the late 1990s, we established a sidewalk fund that was to be fueled by people who were building subdivisions and didn't want a sidewalk to nowhere, so that we could waive the sidewalk requirement for a subdivision and they would make an in-kind contribution to the fund. So the mechanism actually exists, but it never went anywhere because we never put any money in it, really.
I think there's some money in there.
That got
There's some,
reaffirmed.
yeah, but it's not a lot.
Julie?
It's not
Yeah, no,
enough
it's
to
not a
sidewalk the town.
So Traffic Safety Committee, Jerry Beltis, I was speaking with him over the weekend, and he noted that on the fire department plan in East Harwich, there's no monies for sidewalk in that budget. So you've got that sidewalk that comes around and ends, just ends.
Yep.
Which my dog won't let you just go that way. He makes you bring him longer across the street. Anyways, it ends, and then it's all grass, which is gonna be the new front of the fire station. And then you have the sidewalk that goes down beyond Cape Cod Cooperative that Bill Marsh had to do as part of his connector. So we should be looking at that and connecting.
And
This is-
apply it to the county for
Yeah.
the money.
Yeah,
MPO.
the MP.
The MPO, yeah.
Just two additional items, actually, I
Check in,
just
Leo.
got handed one. So there's open meeting law training on Monday, May 21st. Okay, 2018, from 5:30 to 7:30, 3195 Main Street, Harborview Room, the old jail. And that's open to all elected and appointed officials.
Under the spirit of that, why don't we post it so if 3 of us show up, we could actually go to the meeting?
May 21st, so that's a little bit of,
Let's just let the staff know if we are going to, and then they'll post it. But I'm definitely attending.
and then just the last thing I have is, I am in the process of putting together the 19 budget. Maybe just a kind of a quick preview. I mean, it was a lot tighter than anticipated. So I know the board had a lot of different requests and varying requests, and we got a lot of requests in and a lot of cuts had to be made. So I think some priorities are still in there, but at much scaled down levels. I would say, just so there's no fear factor, that the 2 firefighters and the police officer, that was the board's main priority, are definitely included in that. But much beyond is going to be limited.
Thank you.
And that concludes my comments this evening.
Selectmen's report, Larry?
None.
Julie?
No.
Janelle?
No.
Don?
Oh,
Julie?
sorry. One thing I just wanted to bring to the attention of everybody, because it's been a bit of an issue, I think, is emails. So town emails, and it's on the liaison list on the Board of Selectmen page, but I've sent an email to Foster to ask him to update it to my town email, but I also said to him it might be worthwhile, where we're all listed, is to list everybody's email on that same page, because I don't know that people know to go to the liaison list to look for the email. So I'm just noting that, I mentioned that to Foster.
On that note, we all have town emails. It's just our first initial
Access to it.
with our last name.
Townofharwich.us.
So if people don't know that, then
Well, this stems, I think, from a conversation that happened on social media where some board members were called out for not having a town email address and not responding to their constituents that were complaining on this particular social media site. And just to point out, we can't. We all can't be on that site. It was recommended that we all join and we all answer the constituents. But for anyone listening that does listen, we can't be on that site. So we're off, and that's the reason we're off. If we need to be contacted, we can be contacted. So just real quick, I reminded again on how great Harwich is. And I really don't need to be reminded often. I love this town. But Jimmy Marceline's wake was absolutely amazing how many people went through there and paid respects to the Marceline family. And kudos to the fire and police department for their presence at the wake and for the funeral concession, the support that they gave. Both police and fire had a strong presence. The whole thing was absolutely a true tribute to Jimmy.
So much so that his family was actually stunned by the outpouring.
Right. So we live in a great town with a lot of support. Motion to adjourn?
Someone.
Yeah, Don?